Hey, everybody. Welcome to another great edition of the Bailey Pod on this Thursday, brisk out, and a Happy New Year to all. Well, folks, we saw great Nick 10 football in 2025. We had 5 Nick 10 teams represent the Nick 10 in the IHSA playoffs. We saw Belvedere North reach the semifinals. We saw Jefferson make the playoffs for the first time in 32 years. In this show tonight, we're going to take a look back at 2025, so don't go anywhere, folks, because we got an action-packed one tonight here on the Bailey Pod. Let's make this a family night. As a matter of fact, go grab a snack and let's get ready for the Bailey Pod. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another great edition here on the Bailey Pod. Again, Happy New Year to all. Hope everybody's safe and had a phenomenal new year. Looking forward to 2026. Folks, before I get going, I just want to pay my respects to not my respects, but my thanks to those that have gone and watched the Bailey Pod week in and week out. I hope you love the content that we're serving you week in and week out on Nick 10 football. Again, we couldn't do this without you. Keep subscribing, keep coming in and watching the Bailey Pod. Definitely means a lot to us. Folks, tonight we're in for a treat. I got my guys in the house, Harold Bone, Rockton, Roscoe News, and my main man, Drew Collins from WTVO Fox Sports. What's happening, fellas? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Tim.
Yeah, Happy New Year's, everybody. And super excited. What a fantastic year of football this was here in Northern Illinois.
Absolutely.
Such a fantastic year. So excited to talk about it.
Absolutely, fellas. Absolutely. Guys, I think the team that we need to start with is Belvedere North, Blue Thunder, man. What a phenomenal season they had this year, making it all the way to the state semifinals, losing at home against a real damn good football team who actually ended up winning state in that class to St. Francis. Guys, let's start there. What did we see from Belvedere North this year, and were we surprised at the success that they had in 2025? Harold, I'll start with you.
As far as surprise, no surprise. This team was building over the last couple of years. They were close previous years. Coach Beck and his staff over there did a tremendous job of building this team. And, they had a great group of seniors that put everything in to being as successful as they were this season. They ran through the Nick 10, I would say, fairly easily. And then once they got to the playoffs, they hit their stride. Their last game against St. Francis, they just ran up against a really great team. But no surprises there at all from the Blue Thunder over there.
Yeah, Drew?
Yeah, I think we saw what we all expected. I know, like you, me, and Scott, we had them, number one in the conference, and I think we expected them to go on and do things in the playoffs, and they did. I think that game against Canelan, opened up a lot of eyes in the state that, they went up to a similar team, a team that most people thought that they would beat B North, and B North beat them, got a stride, beat Cary Grove, and then, got to St. Francis. So I think it's what I expected, and maybe us since we're familiar, but I think they maybe opened some eyes of other people across the entire state of Illinois.
Yeah, I would have to agree with both of you guys. I think you guys are spot on. I think, I wasn't really surprised. I don't think any of us were surprised with the success that they had. We knew what they had coming back in 2025, some really phenomenal athletes in Booker, Roman, and Minbucci coming back at the quarterback position, Alexander coming back at the receiver position, a really strong defense coming back. So we kind of knew, they could make some noise and they could potentially make a good run in the IHSA playoffs like we saw in 2025. If you look back and you see what they were able to do, and again, starting off and getting that first victory and then continuing to build momentum and then going over to Cary Grove and beating Cary Grove and then coming back and having that semifinal game at home. So, guys, I'm with you on this one. I'm not too surprised at what they did this year. I know, they would definitely want a different outcome going to that game and then winning that game as St. Francis did, as we saw that on IHSA Network. But, I think Coach Beck did a phenomenal job of just getting his kids ready week in and week out. As he did during the regular season, and he did it did a phenomenal job. Him and Coach Fagan did a phenomenal job, during the postseason of getting those guys ready. And that was the actual DNA of Belvedere North this year, just being ready at any time.
Yeah, I think the way that they prepared for each and every game and what they had to do, they looked inside themselves. They didn't really look at their opponent. Their opponent could have been a different every Friday night or every Saturday. You know, they it didn't matter the opponent. They were going to do what they were going to do, and they were going to be successful anyway. I will say this though, I've had the opportunity during kind of the lull here after the season to talk with a number of college coaches that are now looking at the Nick 10 for players to maybe bring into their programs because they got the exposure Belvedere North did for the conference. And, you know, that's something that I think sometimes that we forget about. The college coaches, you know, they have how many thousands of athletes on the high school level, and then they have how many high schools and conferences across the country they need to look at. Sometimes, you know, a team like Belvedere North that gets that additional media exposure in the city of, you know, Chicago and the surrounding area there, it does bring more exposure to the rest of the kids in the conference. And I think that's something that, you know, we don't always think about, but it did happen, and it does happen.
And just to elaborate off that, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I know before my time in here in Rockford, Scott's told me about many excellent athletes, football, basketball, baseball, that have came through the state line and have just been so unnoticed. And I know since I've been here, we've had more players, you know, Power 5, Power 4 schools, Keeson Taylor, Messiah Tilson, you know, and I'm looking at kids like Eric Roman, and I'm like, how does this kid not have possibly Power 4 offers or multiple D1 offers? I mean, there's just so many talented football players that are just getting overlooked. And like you said, I think, you know, one of our local schools in our conference makes a deep run. Hopefully that doesn't just help B North kids, but, you know, the Harlem kids and the Guilford and Hano going into next year. I would love to see that, because there's nothing that makes me more happy than giving these kids their coverage and letting that coverage, let scouts seeing that coverage. I talk to all the kids all the time on like Instagram. I'm just like, hey man, like I really hope this will, you know, take these clips and run with them. I want you to, you know, get more notice, get more offers. So like you said, like I couldn't preach that more. I hope our Nick 10 kids can get noticed more and more year over year.
Yeah. And to expound on what you just alluded to, Drew and Harold, you know, I think kids today, they need to go to camps. You know, they need to get in front of coaches. You know, we know, Notre Dame may not come here. Ohio State may not come here, you know, so these kids have to actually get themselves entrenched in camps, you know, go to camps, get in front of these scouts. Hopefully you impress, you know, to where you can turn some heads of some coaches that may, you know, contact you or put you on their list as players to watch in 2026 or 2027, you know, because I think, you know, what we're seeing here in our conference, you know, we're not seeing the parity. And sometimes when you don't have the parity, and when you have a lopsided conference, so to speak, you know, scouts are like, okay, well, I can go to Chicago and go visit 2 schools, opposed to coming to Rockford and looking at the Nick 10 and seeing, you know, maybe, you know, instead of looking at all these teams within your league that are actually, some of these teams, are subpar programs, you know, and they have been for a while. You know, but I think only way to be able to fix that is that, you know, I think you got to start at the grassroots. I think you got to, you know, get into the middle schools and ensure that, you know, those kids are coming along as well. You know, you're seeing progress at your middle school level as well. And then so when those kids become freshmen, obviously you can keep a better eye on them because they're in your school now, but also too, just making sure that each and every athlete in your program is actually moving in the right direction in terms of their progression year in and year out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a quick example, you know, Belvedere North. So leading up to the St. Francis game, I was contacted by the Chicago Sun-Times asking me for some information on them. I've never been contacted by a Chicago paper or an affiliate at all from anywhere in Chicago asking for information for a story they were writing on them. They use that information. I'm going to guess they use the information that I helped get for them for that. But that gave it more exposure to more kids in the Nick 10. And that's what I think sometimes we all do this. We all kind of look within our own spectrum or our own vision, right? We don't see all the other things going on. And I think that's a big thing that, you know, sure, we want the conference in total to have success, but it's not only about these kids at the high school level, but it's where are they going to go after that? If these kids want to play at the collegiate level and continue to move up, the way to do that is bring exposure to them. College coaches, a lot of times, And I have a lot of friends that are college coaches. They're not the most active hustle type coaches. They want to be fed information, and the easiest way to do that is they go on the internet and they'll search Rockford football players, right? And they'll find someone and things like that. So I think the success of Belvedere North and what they did in the postseason and opening the eyes up for the rest of the state does help the conference in total.
Absolutely.
Obviously, with Messiah and Keeson, they're elite football players, the best of the best in the state and the country. That's going to continue to bring more exposure. And as the conference gets better in total, so as the teams that have struggled for a number of years, as they've gotten better, as Jefferson did this year, that's going to raise the level of the conference.
And guys, we're all kind of saying the same thing. I think more so also too is that we have talent here in our area in the conference. Byron's got talent. Stillman's got talent. You've seen kids go on to the next level from those two schools that I just alluded to, Byron and Stillman. So I think with the area schools that we're talking about, the Guilfords, the Auburns in the East, and the Boylans and the Jeffersons, and the other schools within our conference, I just think that coaches today, you have to be able to bring your players along. I think every high school coach is responsible for making sure that his team and his kids within his program, you're moving in the right direction. And I haven't really seen that a whole lot from schools. But hopefully, in 2026, we'll see some things change, see some things moving in the right direction to where, again, we're seeing more kids get opportunities, because that's what we're saying here. We're just not seeing enough kids get the opportunities that we think they should have. Now, is every kid within every Nick 10 school Division I? No. Is every kid within the Nick 10 division? Are these all scholarship kids? Probably not. But there probably are some scholarship kids that just don't get the look. So I think there needs to be something, something done there. How do we get our kids more exposure? And again, I just alluded to a second ago, get out the camps. You kids got to go to camps. Notre Dame's not coming here. Ohio State's not coming here. You got to go to them. If you aspire to play for those types of programs and you think that you're a Power 5 kid, then you need to put yourself on that platform and go out and perform. And hopefully you can turn some heads and, your phone rings and it's Ohio State. That's how it goes.
I also think, the priority of the playoffs and getting in there and winning some games is going to just give exposure for the entire conference in general. And I'm sorry if you hear my cat in the background, but, you look at Harlem, they lose to Central. Central goes on. They end up playing, who was it? Fenwick goes on, they win state. Jefferson plays Brother Rice, they go on and win state. So our teams got to the playoffs and they played some really good teams that went on to win state. Guilford played St. Rita. That was a crazy, hectic, everyone was there, bunch of coverage. And I, even going back to the Jefferson Chicago Brother Rice game, on my social medias, that's like my most viewed highlights ever because of the Brother Rice, which they went on and won state too, because of all their coverage. So, I just think, like you said, like the independence of doing your own thing, going to the camps, but just the conference as a whole, getting into the playoffs and making a name for yourself, gathering some respect up into the state of Illinois, I think that would also help. Right. But, that takes a collaborated effort, all the teams, elevating and getting better.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, guys. Let's get back to Belvedere North. I mean, I know we got kind of off Belvedere North here. We're talking about the next level, Division I, Division II scholarship kids and getting the recognition that they deserve. As I watched that game, Harold, you were there. Actually, you weren't there, Harold. Drew, I think you were there for a little bit. You shot some of the actual game. As I watched that game, fellas, and people have asked me, where did Belvedere North, fall short? Was it the run game? Did they not come ready to play that night? And guys, my fair estimation, I thought they played fairly well, but they turned the ball over. And I alluded to that, throughout the weeks in the show when we started our playoff edition. I said, when you get into the playoffs, you have to become a different team, and I think they did that. And I said also too, when you're in the playoffs, you can't turn the ball over. You can't turn the ball over. And you see here, quarterback Bucci threw an ill-advised pass, and St. Francis just capitalized on Belvedere North's mistakes, and I don't think anybody would disagree with me. And then also too, I don't think Bucci was 100. I mean, not Bucci, but Booker was 100%. I saw him getting up Sometimes when he got tackled, I mean, even here, he's going off the field, he's kind of gimping a little bit. I don't think he was at 100%, So again, we can sit here and say, what they weren't that day, what they were that day. Again, you got to give credit to St. Francis. They were a damn good football team. And that's the reason why they won the state title in that class. So, again, but as it pertains to, what Belvedere North didn't do, I just think that, also too defensively, I think their secondary got tested. I think they were, they got caught, so to speak, sleeping at times, as St. Francis quarterback did a phenomenal job of just shredding that secondary of Belvedere North. So, again, just getting back to Belvedere North and just looking at some of the things that they just really didn't do right, that they had been doing all season wrong. That's just my take on, what I thought, they could have done, what they didn't do against St. Francis here about a month ago.
Yeah. Going back to it from what I remember, my 3 main takeaways is Booker was definitely hurt. I knew that going into the game. From going to the practice earlier in the week. You can sit here and make excuses, but at the end of the day, it is a big deal. He's their best player. He's always on the field, offense and defense. He was very limited. I don't even remember him playing much in the second half at all once they got behind. So You can sit here and say that's an excuse. I think it's legit. You lose your best player who's always on the field. That's going to be a big deal. Number 2 was the time of possession. B North, the way their offense is, they're going to have to, they want the time possession. Well, when you keep turning the ball over and your offense is not a fast offense because you run 95% of the time, that's going to be hard to claw back into a game. There was another playoff game we were at, Tim, earlier where they came back. And I remember telling you, I was like, it's going to be hard to claw back into a game when you run their style of offense. So that's the other thing. And I think my last thing I remember was just their secondary play. They, outside of the Harlem game, their secondary probably didn't see as good as a quarterback and receiver duo as they did in this game. I don't remember the kids' names on the other team, but man, they were shredding them up in the secondary. And I just think that comes from all the Nick 10 games that they didn't see that.
Right. Yeah. I totally agree with you. I just think, again, you look at, you go back and we talk about, as we alluded to earlier, fellas, we talked about, the competitiveness of teams back east here, Chicagoland area and the suburb areas, you just see a different athlete. You see a different game of play. And I think a lot of the coaches in the Nick 10 would agree with me. I think, what those guys do back east, they do a really good job of developing their players and making sure that these kids are ready on an annual basis. And I think Belvedere North did a phenomenal job of really just preparing for this team of St. Francis. But again, you can't make excuses of why they came up with the loss. St. Francis just showed up and showed out, fellas. I mean, total offense, they had 354 yards of total offense. Through the air, they were hot. On the ground, they were hot. They did a really good job of just making sure that, they didn't really give up big plays like these teams that played Belvedere North this year had. You didn't see Roman go for 50 or 60. You didn't see Bucci go for 40 or 50. You didn't see Bucci throw for 100 plus yards. I think, also too, Harold, we mentioned this on our last show that we were talking about what Bucci had to do in order for Belvedere North to even stay in the game. And I think I alluded to, I stated that, he just needs to be the facilitator, not turn the ball over, and just manage that game. And he didn't do that, against St. Francis in the semifinal loss.
Yeah, and guys, as you mentioned, I wasn't at the game, but I've had a chance to watch it. The two big takeaways I took away from that was Belvedere North never had the momentum in that game at any point. At any point, normally they grab the momentum and then they hold on to it. But every time that they got a turnover, or they had a turnover, St. Francis and built on that and built on that and built on that. The other thing was, and this is kind of how I look at the game. St. Francis, when Booker was in there, did not play more than 12 yards off the line of scrimmage. There is not a team that Belvedere North played all season long that would play that close to the line of scrimmage with Booker out there. You just wouldn't, because you're afraid he's going to go around the end and take it to the house. Well, they could tell early in that football game that he wasn't at his optimal health.
Right.
So you could move up. You could then, I would say, stack the line of scrimmage, stop the inside running game, and then you didn't have to worry about anything going to the outside. I think St. Francis quickly recognized what we probably all had a good idea of, as Ben wasn't completely healthy. And that is the key to the game. I don't care what level of football you're at. If you don't have your best player or your best players healthy enough, it's going to change the outcome of a game a lot of times.
And if you go back and you watch the game, you look and say, okay, where did St. Francis really dominate? And you got to start at the LOS. What they did, offensively, up front of just protecting their quarterback and allowing him to actually just, thread the needle, through that secondary of Belvedere North was nothing short of phenomenal. He was protected. He stayed upright all the time. And you go back and you watch the film, this quarterback was pretty damn good. I mean, he actually, his reads were on point, guys. I mean, he knew when the linebackers dropped, do I run or do I pass? I mean, they ran a lot of RPO pretty much the entire night. And, the kid used his legs well. I think he actually beat Belvedere North with both his legs and his arm talent. And the receiver, he came up big too. I think he had, over 100 plus or close to 100 yards in receiving, 9 catches, 69. Excuse me, that's the wrong stat. But he had a phenomenal night, receiving five receptions here. Glock is his name. Glock had 5 receptions for 83 yards and 3 TDs, and just really just went through like a knife, through that secondary of Belvedere North. But guys, we can't take anything away from North. And I don't think we're saying that. I just think that North was not really truly, ready, particularly in the secondary. They weren't ready for that type of play because, again, if you look at our conference, the Nick 10, we're not a pass dominant oriented conference. I think we're more run dominant. And I think that's what we need to see more balance in our conference. I think if we can see more balance in our conference, I think teams that make the playoffs will have a better time with actually challenging teams that are run heavy and pass heavy, that have balance, so to speak. Because I just think Belvedere North secondary just couldn't do anything with St. Francis, and you saw it with your own eyes.
Yeah, I mean, look, Belvedere North 12-1. 9-0 in the Nick 10 conference, a tremendous season, just a tremendous season, and a great 2-year run for that Belvedere North Blue Thunder program. It's going to be interesting to kind of see what happens in the next year and a half, 2 years for that program, because they are losing a lot of leadership, a lot of senior leadership,
and Harold, and just to cap on what you're saying, and that's where I'm going to next. I mean, you look what they lose. They lose Booker. They lose Roman. They lose Alexander. Just a few guys I'm mentioning, and then they lose Bucci. They lose pretty much, the guys who made plays for the last 2 to 3 years, and they bring back. And I'm looking back. They bring back Malcroy. They bring back their fullback. So again, is this I think the question out there is what type of Belvedere North are we going to see in 2026? I think I'll answer that question first. I think we're going to see a competitive Belvedere North, but will we see the dominance that we saw for like the last 2 to 3 years on the ground on the ground game that they've had? I don't think we'll see that, guys. I just really don't. I think you can't replace a Booker, you can't replace a Roman. It's hard to replace any of these guys, Bucci, Alexander, for that matter. I just think that they're going to be in not a rebuild mode, but they got to figure out how to reload in 2026 in order for them to be competitive. Go ahead, Drew.
Can I say this real quick? I totally agree. I have no idea what their team will look like next year. And I'm looking at, teams like Harlem and Guilford are returning a lot of good guys. And I'm like, I don't know what that's going to be. But I just want to say this. This is a quote from a coach in the Nick 10. He said, everyone's hitting the portal. Everyone's hitting the portal. So, and it's true. We saw that going into this year. So I will never in the rest of my life be able to sit here and say, I don't think this team's going to be good because I don't know what they're going to look like. You never know anymore.
Right.
Like literally a coach said that to me. Everyone's hitting the portal. So everyone's hitting the portal. So we don't know what could happen, right?
I agree, but and we have to be realistic here too. You're losing those caliber of players, and some of those players that I alluded to just a second ago. I mean, some of those guys were two-way players. Alexander, two-way player. Booker, two-way player. Roman, two-way player. I may be leaving a couple of guys out, and I don't know. Let's just start here. Belvedere North is a damn good football team. They're well coached. Okay. Probably two of the best. Fagan and Beck are probably two of the better coaches that we have in this conference, bar none. But how do you how do you replace those guys that I just mentioned? It's going to be very, very difficult for them to do that. Now, will they get transfers? Maybe they may get one or two, but will this transfer come in and be an impact player, so to speak, like Williams did over there at Jefferson? He came in and he impacted. I don't know if those types of players are out there that can come into a program and have an immediate impact on an offense and on a team as the way, Williams did, and some other guys that transferred. Sanders over there at Auburn, he was an impact kid. So again, I don't know if Belvedere North is going to have that opportunity as some of these public schools have had in the past of getting transfers.
Yeah, that's why, that's what's so great about high school sports is from year to year, class to class, you don't know what you're going to do, but that's also what makes the greatness of high school coaches. They have to, they can't, although it's a little different now, you can't go out and hand pick guys left and right. Like you can't recruit guys to your school unless you're in the inner city and you play in a Catholic league, but that's a whole nother story. But
and
in the Big Ten, you can't really do that. So I'm excited to see the change up for Belvedere North. They're going to run their same stuff. They're going to run their same defense. As long as they bring back coaches, they're going to run the same things. They have some younger kids that, I saw a couple of their JV games. They have some younger kids that are pretty good. Are they going to be as good as they were? That's tough to say because that was a really, really good program.
And guys, that's what we're all saying. I think we're all saying the same thing. How good are they going to be in 2026 with losing the actual bevy of playmakers that they're losing in Booker, Roman, Alexander, Bucci, leaving out a couple names, I'm sure. But how do you just hope that their sophomore team, they get in the weight room during the off season, have a great off season. Because I really do. I think their success is going to be predicated on their offseason, guys. And we can say this about every school that we're getting ready to go through right now. I think everybody's success starting in November is going to be or December is going to be predicated on how well they actually see the progression that they need to see during the offseason. Because if you look at the offseason, I think football has the longest offseason. I think it's like 8 months, before they, get back on the gridiron. And start the regular season begins. So, no excuses. I think every team should come back better, but, it remains to be seen, who comes back and gets back on top in 2026. We have some notions of who we think that's going to be on top in 2026, but, I'm looking at Belvedere North again, looking what they're losing. I'm looking around the conference and looking at the rest of these other teams and look at what they're losing, what's coming back. And I'm kind of surmising, my prognostication, who's going to do it in 2026 off of that, who's leaving, who's coming back, so to speak, scenario.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with all your sentiments there, Tim.
Yeah, guys, let's continue to keep our foot on the gas, as we illuminate these teams. Let's talk about Harlem a little bit. Harlem, obviously, another great season. A lot of guys coming back, and we'll get to that in a second. Fell short. Harlem fell short, getting beat by Burlington in the second round of the IHSA playoffs. Guys, is this the Harlem team that we expected, or better yet, did Harlem actually perform to their actual capabilities this year, or did they underperform?
I think they actually exceeded the expectations earlier in the year. Fawcett, their quarterback, turned out to be obviously the best QB in the conference, as he was the first teamer. Through less than, I believe he had 1 or 2 interceptions on the season, over 20 touchdowns. I don't think anybody going into the season could have said, hey, Fawcett's going to come out. He's going to play this phenomenal game. He's going to get all those talented skill position players there. They're going to step up defensively like they did, and that's absolutely what they did. They stepped up defensively. Coach Morrow over there and his staff did a great job of putting Fawcett and the rest of those kids in great positions to be successful. And the only games they lost were because, they just didn't execute like they needed to. The game plans, I think, were fine. They just didn't execute. When it comes to Burlington, look, Burlington's a good football program. They have been for a very long time. And Fawcett, just a sophomore this year, just played phenomenal. And I think they well over exceeded any expectations we could have had for them.
Yeah, I'll break this into 2 sections. In terms of playoffs, I was a little disappointed. I don't know much about Burlington, and I did not go to this game. Scott went to this game, so I can't speak on the game specifically too much. But I think if they could have beaten, you could say shoulda, woulda, coulda, but then they would have played Fenwick the next round. It went on to, I believe, win state. So I think that would have been good to see how they match up with the best in the state. But in terms of the regular season, I think considering what we saw in the beginning of the year, I did their preseason preview before the season started, and they didn't even have a quarterback. They didn't know who their quarterback was because their quarterback from last year is a stud baseball player who stopped playing football for majority of the year to focus on baseball. He ended up coming back to play tight end at the end of the season, but they didn't have a quarterback. So we're talking about this Braxton Foster kid. He's a sophomore. We don't know who he's going to be. And he turns out to be the best quarterback in the conference. So in terms of that, in terms of all the transfers they had, all the positions they filled, they played great. In terms of playoffs, I was a little disappointed. I didn't know too much about Burlington or this game specifically, but I thought with, like you said earlier, Tim, this was one of our teams that, likes to pass the ball. They're not just a run heavy team. That could mix things up in the playoffs when they go up against these other teams. But like I said, I can't speak too much specifically on that game, but definitely, succeeded their expectations, I would say.
Yeah. And I totally agree with both of you. You guys are both spot on. I just look at, what they were able to do this year, again, Fawcett, phenomenal season. They add McClellan, they get him, in the transfer portal, Drew, as you mentioned, as you alluded to earlier, he's a transfer kid, and then they get Ladarius Foster, they add him to the mix, which made them more of a dynamic team offensively. I just look back and I say, okay, wow, Harlem had a really phenomenal season. Coach Morrow did a phenomenal job of actually getting his boys ready week in and week out, in his second year back as head coach. And just really getting that Husky Nation, so to speak, excited about, what's in the pipeline, because, you look at their roster and you look at the guys that they have coming back, McClellan back, Cook back, Fawcett back, Foster back. One guy that they do lose, who I thought was a hell of a player, Dozie Coleman, they lose him to graduation, but the guys that I just alluded to, those guys are all back, and those guys were those guys were playmakers, within our conference. And I think Harlem has something to look forward to in 2026, but definitely exceeded my expectations in 2025, because I didn't even have Harlem. I think, Drew, on our show when we did our top 5 list, I don't think Harlem was in my top 3. That I can think of right now, but I don't think they were in my top 3. So, they surprised a lot of people. But you look at, again, how well coached they are. Coach Morrow is one of the best coaches we have in the Nick 10. Look at the playmaking ability that they had, and look how, and you guys alluded to this a second ago. Well, look how well Fawcett played as a sophomore. Okay. This kid was only a sophomore. Okay. He's got a lot of things to work on. I'm pretty sure he's probably working on those things right now during the offseason. But you look at what he did coming in, not knowing if he was going to be on the varsity level or not, and ended up getting his opportunity, and the kid never blinked. Tough kid, tough-nosed kid, definitely a leader. You could see it from the sidelines. Definitely a good leader, and just really carried that offense like a quarterback needs to. And I think he actually was able to, grow a lot of trust, so to speak, from Morrow and that coaching staff. Because, again, as a head coach, when you have to start a sophomore that you really don't know a whole lot about, because Morrow was just coming back after his first year being gone, and then coming back and getting the job last year, and now coming back into his second year, he doesn't really know a whole lot about, the freshman class, other than what he knew when he actually got the job over there at Harlem. But, again, I think when you can gain the trust as a sophomore of your head coach and the coaching staff, you can gain the respect of your peers, and they trust you, you could see his confidence. The kid carried himself very well on the field, played with a lot of moxie. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does in 2026 and what type of growth that we're going to see out there on that gridiron in 2026, fellas.
Yeah, and you named up a lot of the position players, but even a lot of the big boys in the trenches are returning. Noah Crandall led the conference in sacks, I believe. He was only a junior. And I've heard that their JV team was one of the better, freshman or JV teams as well. So I'm so interested in what this team's going to look like next year. Hopefully they don't lose anybody to the portal. But from what I've heard, I've talked to a couple of kids. They've already been doing a lot of 7-on-7s. So apparently there's a 7-on-7 team coming to Rockford or something like that. I don't want to get it mixed up, but I've already talked to some of them at some of the basketball games I've been to. But yeah, I'm so excited to see. They lose Broom here, who was an absolute stud for them. A lot of big plays out of Broom, but they have a couple running backs that kind of share the ball behind him that are going to probably all be returning. So I just think you got the weapons. Hopefully you got the big boys in the trenches. I mean, another year under Coach Morrow, you would like to see them make that next step at the top of the Nick 10.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Drew. Definitely. Harold, a little bit more from you on Harlem. I know,
regarding Harlem, they have a plethora of talent, and you mentioned that their younger team, their freshman, sophomore team, littered with talent. I don't know along the offensive and defensive lines. I didn't see a lot there. Skill position players, they're definitely loaded. But for them to take the next step, it's their O&D lines that need to improve. I think in the games against Belvedere North, the games against Guilford, and I would even say the other games that they struggled early, Hananiga, they struggled on the O&D lines, and that's something that it's going to take Coach Morrow and that staff a couple years to get their program involved as far as that goes. I've never been a skill position player. I've always been the guy in the trench. And I know it takes a while once a coach comes in to kind of change the lifting pattern or what you're going to do to improve in the offseason. It takes a couple years. This will be his third full season. So, obviously he came back because they weren't meeting an expectation. That O-line needs to step up. That D-line needs to step up. You mentioned Noah Crandall. Look, he's a stud. He's an absolute stud, but he needs more help around him along that defensive line. They do lose, I believe, a couple of linebackers that have been players for them for a couple of years. Craig, I believe, leaves, and I can't remember the other kid's name. He leaves, so they're going to need somebody to step up there. But skill position-wise, I think they're going to be just fine. They got plenty of kids to come out there and play, and on that what I call fast turf over there, they're going to put up a ton of highlights. Drew, you're going to be over there a lot next year seeing them score tutties. That's what you're going to see.
Yeah, they'll be tough. They'll be tough. Again, just looking at the roster, guys, I'm pretty excited about what they're going to actually product they're going to have to actually have out there on the field for 2026. Guys, let's continue to move here, keep our foot on the gas, so to speak. Hananiga Indians didn't have quite the season that they would have liked. Went 5-5 on the season, lost their first round playoff game to Nazareth 42-13. Harold, you followed this team very closely all year. Give me your candid assessment on what you felt went wrong over there at Hananiga for them to be a 5-5 team, which I'm sure they haven't seen 5-5 in probably over the last decade, in my guesstimate. But Harold, talk to us a little bit about some things that actually went wrong over there in 2025.
So it's funny you bring that up. So I was just having coffee with a couple of the old timers around the area, and we were talking about it. They've been here much longer than I have. What went wrong with Hananiga this year? The fact that families didn't bring their athletic enough kids into the district. That's what happened. They had plenty of kids. They just didn't have enough upper level, I guess, common Hananiga athletes in the program. Cole Warrens, the Isaiah Huey's, like those kids, they weren't in the program this year. They have good, hardworking kids, and that's what I think that they got to the level that they could, and that was about where they were going to be. And I hate to say this, but that might be where they're going to sit for a little while. Some of the younger kids, they're not as athletic as the previous classes have been, and every single high school program in the country pretty much goes through this. You go through the ups and the downs of what you get from athletes. You don't get to pick and choose. Now, transfers, we're not talking about transfer because nobody knows what that looks like. I think Hananiga did as good as they could this year. Obviously would have helped if Drew Shockley would have been healthy the majority of the season. Maybe they get one more victory, and maybe they don't face Nazareth Academy or Nazareth University, as I called them, in the first round of the playoffs. And I just feel like they maximized every opportunity this year to get the victories they could with the team that they had. It was not a super talented Hananiga team. They didn't have a lot of great playmakers on the team, but they had gritty players. They had guys that would work hard, that would stay focused, and they would do their job. And they did what they had to do. And Shockley, once he came back, he gave them a little bit more explosiveness. out of the backfield, but not a ton.
Drew?
Yeah, I think they were the classic, middle of the pack Big Ten. You beat them, you're the upper echelon. You lose to them, you're the bottom of the neck. That when I looked at the conferences, I looked at who played Hononegah each week, because that was kind of like, okay, where is this team at? They get blown out by Harlem. They did, have Guilford close. They beat Jefferson Auburn. They blow out Freeport. Like, I'm just going back. They played Belvedere North really well, but then they come back and lose to Belvedere 8-6. So it's like, when I played them, each week, it's like I would look at them and be like, this program, they're never just going to roll over. They're going to play the upper echelon really tough, no matter who they have on the field. That's just Hononegah football. Like you guys said, for so long, way before I was in Rockford, I've heard it all about how good Hononegah is, just their program, and Coach Zimmerman's done such a great job and so forth, and the kids that live in the area. But like you just alluded to, like, the talent you have is a talent that's going to be on the field, and that's only going to take you so far. So, I don't know what they're going to look like this year, but I did hear that they have a freshman or sophomore that ended up getting some varsity time at the end of last season, who's a heck of an athlete. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but hopefully they have some of those guys that can come in here and make those big plays. And what's their quarterback situation going to look like with all, the injuries and the seniors and the other transfers they've had the past 2 years at quarterback. So maybe we'll get those answers over the next few months. But Hano, you can never count them out. Such a solid program, good coach, good program. But what will be the talent that they have on the field is my question.
Right. And I totally agree with both of you guys. I think you guys are spot on. You hit the nail on the head. Harold, especially you speaking very candidly about, just the lack of playmakers. They didn't have the Isaiah Hueys. They didn't have the Cole Warrens. They didn't have those caliber of players this year. I thought, Brady Jarvis, did what he could do. Banker did what he could do. Obviously Shockey with the injuries. He had the injury bug pretty much all season. He looked good at times, and sometimes he didn't. So you look and see. Look at their skill positions. There was one guy that really jumps out at me is Michael Mueller. He was a kick returner. I think he wore number 35. I think, Harold, I've had some conversations with you before and asked, why isn't this kid lining up in the backfield more? He's probably, hands down, he looked the part. He looked like he was their best athlete. So I'm just trying to figure out, get my brain around, okay, well, why wasn't he more involved in that Hononegah offense? Because I think this year you really saw a subpar running game of Hononegah. I don't think you saw that dominant running game as we've seen in years past. A couple years ago, they had Anderson and Smith, two dogs, man, that could actually just grind out, get you 5, get you 6, maybe get you 10, maybe even go 30 to the house, to get a TD. But you really didn't see those type of playmakers at the receiver position or the running back position this year, and let alone the actual quarterback position. You just didn't see it. We're accustomed to seeing a Hononegah program, Harold, and you can attest to this, a Hononegah program that airs it out every year. Okay, has really damn good quarterback play, that has a damn good running game, and then usually has some type of playmaker, like a caliber of a Huey on offense each and every year. Again, we just didn't see those types of players.
Yeah, we didn't. And you mentioned Mueller. He great athlete. Made a tremendous play in the Nazareth Academy, playing a kick return, just juked 5 guys out, and they got knocked out at about the 50-yard line. I mean, it's just a phenomenal play. What does his improvement look like over the next year and a half? How are they going to use him? He's played both wide receiver. He's played running back. He's played on defense alone. I mean, they have to figure those things out. The other thing we have to remember about next year is Coach Zimmerman's last year. He's announced that next year is going to be. So these kids coming back next year, they don't want to disappoint. They don't want to not be at the top of the conference or try and win conference for him in his last year. So that's a big motivating factor for any team. But when it's the last year of an icon, and I would say he's a Hononegah icon for sure. He's been there for
Absolutely.
45 years or something like that.
Yeah.
44 years. I mean, he's been there forever within the Hononegah football program.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
that's another motivating factor for these guys. I know that they're having a great turnout for their off-season training. I've seen some things and videos with kids and coaches, and they're fully invested as they need to be to improve themselves. Right. As far as their quarterback position next year, that's a little up in the air. They have some sophomores that played. They had a freshman that played on the JV team, that really improved as the season wore on. You know, what are they going to do? Are they going to look for more of a running quarterback? Are they going to go back to more of what they're, I think, comfortable with, which is an RPO style quarterback? Outside of Cole Warren, they're used to having an RPO style quarterback. Are they going to go back to that, or do they want someone who can throw the ball a little bit better? The freshman throws the ball a little bit better, so they have some decisions to make moving forward. But I do think Hananiga they're gonna claw their way back up to the top 3 in the conference. I'd be shocked next year if they're not a top 3 team in the Big Ten conference.
Yeah, and you look at their coaching staff. I mean, they're well coached. I mean, I think these kids are getting really good coaching. I think Zimmerman's had a phenomenal. He's had one hell of a career as a head coach over there at Hananiga. He's had a very illustrious career as being the head coach over there at Hananiga. I know he's in his last season, so it's going to be really interesting to see, how they come out in 2026. And again, Harold, you just alluded to it. What type of off season are they going to have? And I think everything comes down to off season, fellas. Are our guys in the weight room? Also too, what are they doing when we're in the weight room? Are we doing the right things? Are we doing the wrong things? What type of transfer are we going to be able to see, over to the gridiron? Because sometimes a lot of teams will go in the weight room. Yeah, they'll lift weights, they'll lift heavy, but not a lot of that's really going to actually translate to the actual football field. So, hopefully Hananiga, they can have some athletes out there. They, some guys that can go from 0 to 60. They can find another Isaiah Huey. I think they have one, Mueller. Close to it, at least in terms of his athleticism. But I think they're going to need more than Mueller in 2026 to be able to get back to the top 3, top 4 of that conference. I really do. I think they're always going to have linemen. I think no one can refute that. I think Hananiga is always going to be. I think that's their DNA, so to speak, of that program. Really good linemen. They've had some formidable ones, in years past. But I think again, based on what I saw in 2025. You got to find some playmakers, and you got to have more than one if you really want to actually get to the top of the conference again, like you have been in the years past.
Yeah, fully agree with that. The other overwhelming theme that I've heard with the offseason kind of training for them is sort of kind of a revenge tour. They feel like they were somewhat disrespected within the conference, even though they finished where they did. They felt a little disrespected. And I think the kids are using that to motivate themselves. I hope they do. And Harold, I'm glad you brought that up, because at the end of the night, football is a game. It's a sport you play. Okay. We put athletes out there to actually make plays and perform and do all that stuff that they do. We have to get in the mode of making sure that we're just not developing football players. We're developing athletes, because that's what those kids are. They're athletes, and how athletic they become is going to depend on what type of off season that they have. I'm just being honest. If they have a really good off season, they address their off season needs. Do they need to get faster? Do they need to get more agile? Do they need to be able to, run east and west, quickly? Were we not as explosive off the ball as we should have been in 2025? What type of things do we need to add? What type of intangibles do we need to add during the offseason in order for us to become that top 2, top 3 program that we have been in years past? It remains to be seen. Again, it's going to be predicated on how well they improve these things, those characteristics that I just mentioned during the offseason. And they should be pissed. They should be pissed. That was their weak link this year. They didn't have the athleticism that they've had in the past. We're not saying that Hananiga's never had good athletes or they never had athletes. No, they have good athletes. They've had good athletes in the past, but we are saying, all 3 of us are saying, we didn't see the actual playmaking ability by their skill guys this year. That's all we're saying. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, we talk about, I know we talked about this with Kaz from Jefferson about the pride in the program and instilling the pride in the program. You have an expectation. Here's your expectations. And Hananiga, the kids, they want to work hard to live up to that reputation that Hananiga has, and where they finish, how they play, and the things that they do on Friday nights. And you can just tell that in the conversations I've had with not only the kids, the coaches, everyone around the football program, the boosters as well. Like they want that back. They want that feeling. They don't like the feeling that they had last year.
Right. And guys, we have to pick out what these teams do right, what we see that they do wrong, what they have and what they don't have. I'm just going to be honest. And I think I'm hopefully next year in 2026, I'm saying something totally different. Because I don't like to come on air and say, oh, they just didn't have the athletes that they've had in the past. No, I want to say something different. I want to say, Hananiga's got really phenomenal athletes. They did a phenomenal job of doing X, Y, Z at these skill positions. They have really great skill players. I want to be able to come on air and say those things, but I also too have to be a realist. If I don't see those characteristics that we just actually alluded to, I don't see speed. I don't see the athleticism where kids can go up, leave the ground, go up, catch the ball at the highest radius, contort their bodies, make plays, stick their foot in the ground, and go north and south, come downhill, make people miss an open field. Those are the things that I'm talking about that I didn't see in 2025.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree with that. It didn't live up to the standard of what Hananiga has been for, well, as long as I've been around, and probably 25 years before that. So, they're putting in the work, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what improvements they have next year.
Yeah, for sure, guys. Let's keep moving on. Let's talk about the Boiling Titans. This team went 2-7, 2025. Obviously, we know they're in search. We'll talk about that in a second. They're in search for new head coach. As John Cacciatore of Boiling has resigned. Guys, you look back at 2020, the Titans of 2025. What did we see different compared to other Titan teams of the past? Harold, start with you.
Well, I got the chance to see them a couple times this year, and the thing that was most concerning to me was that they all didn't seem to be on the same page as a team, and they weren't able to. I can remember I was watching them against Hananiga, and Hananiga had just scored a touchdown, and a couple of the Titans were yelling and screaming at each other, and there didn't seem to be any leadership. There didn't seem to be any captains there. Everyone was yelling at each other and pointing at each other, so there wasn't a clear direction moving forward. And I'm sure that's maybe one of the reasons why Coach Cacciatore stepped down. I don't know. I have no idea why he stepped down. I hope he moves forward and whatever he does and continues to work with kids, because I think he does a great job with kids.
Absolutely.
But the next coach needs to put his arms around this program and create some leadership and move them in the right direction. I think that they are struggling right now, and we can talk about this if we want. Their numbers are down. The enrollment in the school is down. They don't have as many kids to pick from as they have in the past. And then when you lose, you even have less kids that want to be part of the program. And then when you're struggling, how do you turn that around? Well, infusing a new coach in there probably is something they're going to do. But on Friday nights last season, it concerned me a lot with the complete lack of what I felt like was a cohesive unit as a football team and a football program. I think was the biggest glaring need for Boylan last year.
Yeah, I think in my eyes, the most glaring thing was just the lack of numbers. I know towards the end of the year, I think it was the practices in the last week, I did a spotlight story on the long snapper. I'm blanking on his name. I'm so sorry. He's committed to North Dakota State University.
Bernetti.
Yeah. So I was doing a story on him. So I thank you. So I stopped by their practice and did my interviews and get some shots. And there was maybe 20 something kids. I want to say. I mean, some of the smaller conferences that we cover on Fox 39. I go to, the BNC and the NUIC. I go to their practices and they have a bigger turnout. So I can't talk about the program without talking about the numbers, because that was really alarming to me. I've, being, only here for about 16 months, people have told me about the numbers, but that was by far the most glaring thing, is going to a practice seeing maybe 20 kids for the varsity. So, that was the biggest for me. I didn't go to too many Boiling games this year that I can think of off of the top of my head that I remember clearly. I just know the end of the year games, I'm pretty sure were like all blowouts and was like the end of the year not very well, from what I remember. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you guys. I think, the Titans just obviously underperformed. We know a lot of things that are actually, hampering their success right now. Over there, I know enrollment's down and it's impacting, the volume of kids that come out for sports, particularly football. With Drew, you just alluded to, they only had, I think, 20, 22 kids on their roster last year. And you hate to see, Coach Cacciatore go. I know John personally, play with John. John's a good friend of mine, and you just only hope, a program like Boylan, that has just such a rich, genuine history of winning. You mentioned, Boylan is synonymous with winning, and winning state titles, and just having a very, very awesome culture, experience, both academically and athletically. But as it pertains to football, over there at Boylan, I think, this year, obviously they underperformed. They had playmakers, but they just couldn't get it done. I know Hernandez, he had a decent career, didn't probably have the senior year that he would have liked. I know they had some struggles at the quarterback position with Dominic Cacciatore. It's going to be interesting to see if he even comes back to Boylan in 2026. I don't know of that. I'm not going to speak to that. I'm going to be very authentic when I talk about that, because I don't want to say something that I know nothing about, which I don't know anything about him either staying or transferring. So, but it's going to be interesting to see what they can do in 2026 with this new head coach coming in, whoever that's going to be. Hopefully they find a good one. And can this new coach that's coming in, can they inject, that excitement back into that program? Because again, the games that I went to in 2025 and last few years, it just seemed like, the program was in distress. The program was in some type of trouble. Rather it was coaching, rather if it was due to, enrollment. I'm not sure what it was, but again, you look at 2025 and you say, wow, what a disappointment, in 2025, but, again, if they can find the right guy to come in there and just, rejuvenate things, I don't think it's a rebuild. I don't think it's anything like that. Whoever gets the job, I don't think you're going to have to come in and rebuild. I just think that you're just going to come in and really inject some excitement back into that program. But again, it just remains to be seen how good they're going to be in 2026. Again, with the 2025 disappointment that we haven't seen in a long time, in a very great program, as we've seen in the past with Boylan.
Yeah, it is concerning, some of the things that I saw in the program over the last couple of years and kind of where they're moving. And if they can get a guy in there that can enthuse, not only the players, and that's obviously super important, but the boosters that help with the program as well. And that's a big thing that, we don't talk about at some of these other schools, but getting the boosters behind you and the fans and the parents and the supporters and people within the school all moving in the right direction, so that you can then go out and, bring these kids in and they want to play football. I think the idea of kids not wanting to play the game of football, I don't know that that's true. I think it's getting the kids to play in a program that they can feel like they can have some success and some positivity to it is something that for Boylan, they need to do. They need to get some positive momentum moving forward, and bringing a coach in there that either has or hasn't had a legacy there at Boylan is something they need to look at and figure out a way to do it, and then get the energy behind the program. Because I think once they turn that ship in the positive direction, I think they can, again, get back on the winning ways. I think they have the ability to do that. They've shown that in their history. Tim, you are obviously a big part of that for many years, and you could continue to support the Boylan program like you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, but just turning it around in a positive momentum, if they can get that going, they can then finish where they feel like they need to finish, which is in the top half of the conference, top four. Yeah. I think they can do that. Right. They're going to have lots of changes, as you do anytime you move on from a coach. Catch's kid not being there, that's going to be something. Are they going to change the offense? I'm going to assume they are. Are they going to change the defense? Absolutely, they are going to do that. So those things like that. And how quickly can they come around?
And guys, I think whoever's going to be Coach Cacciatore's successor, I think this coach needs to be able to develop. He's got to be able to develop. I mean, you have to have a coach that just not knows the X's and the O's, but a coach that actually truly understands what it means to prepare on an annual basis. in ensuring that your program is ready to really compete each and every year. Okay. I know, again, enrollment down, impacted the number of kids that went out, but guys, we can't use that as an excuse. I think there were some players there in 2025. I think the Hernandez kids were really good athletes. I think Gates was a really good athlete. I think he actually played on varsity as a sophomore. I just think that some of those kids were so underdeveloped to where it was just really blatant that these kids really didn't have the correct progression, so to speak, that you need to see playing the sport of football in any sport that you need to see on an annual basis. You need to see growth. And I didn't see that in 2025, from the Boiling Titans. I didn't see the kids that I saw in 2023, and now they're graduating this year. I didn't see that growth with those kids. They pretty much all stayed the same, and people would say, well, what's that a reflection of? Well, it's a reflection of your coach, because your coach is responsible for ensuring that his players are properly developing on an annual basis. That's how you build a program. So hopefully whoever this coach is that comes in and becomes Coach Cacciatore's successor, hopefully he puts that at the top of his list, because it has to be. Because if that's not at the top of his list, fellas, I think we're in for a long season in 2026 with the Titans.
Yep, fully agree with all those sentiments, Tim. Boylan has an opportunity to kind of sway the tide as to what's going on if they make the right hire, and there are plenty of good candidates around the Rockford, Belvedere, Freeport area that can come in and do that, and I'm sure that the administration over there will make the right choice to put the right man in that position and get him moving.
And guys, I'm going to shed a little bit more light on this. I mean, this is new. This is new for Boylan. In 59 years, Boylan's only had 4 different head coaches. 59 years. Now,
so pay attention to what the Steelers do. Okay.
Now compare that to some of the other schools that are pretty much replacing coaches once every 5 years or once every 3 years. Mm-hmm. There's a new face. There's a new name that we're seeing. That to me, that's called stability. Yeah. That's called a winning culture. Okay. It's going to be interesting to see again who they bring in. Coach Cacciatore won 70% of his games, shared 5 Nick 10 championships. So, you look at his resume and some would say, well, what was the reason for him resigning? What was the reason for wanting to maybe even move on from him? Winning 70% of his games, again, shared 5 Nick 10 championships. Was he not doing enough? Was he not meeting the Titans' expectations? Those are some questions to ask, fellas. Those are some questions to ask.
Yeah, I think the big thing is you just
go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, like you said, I think the biggest thing is just finding someone to uphold that tradition. That's plain and simple, Bar. Just someone who's going to uphold that tradition and get Boylan back on its feet and where it needs to be, whether the numbers are where they are. So I think that's the biggest thing is let's not get someone in here for 3-5 years. Let's get someone in here for 15 years.
Right. And guys, with Boylan having a junior program called the Junior Titans, usually these kids are made up of, there's some public school kids that are actually part of the actual program. Years ago, back in my day, so to speak, years ago, these were all just parochial kids from St. James, St. Rita, St. Bernadette, playing, in that league that they were in. They were the Junior Titans. But it's gonna be interesting to see whoever gets his job. You gotta bless the Junior Titans. And when I say you gotta bless the Junior Titans, you gotta have your hands in that program. You have to have your hands in that program, just like Coach Zimmerman has his hands, so to speak. May not a lot, but he's got an eye on the Junior Indians. He knows what's coming up. And I don't know if he has conversations with those coaches at the junior tackle level, but I'm sure he does. But whoever gets his Boiling job, you got to start there, man. You got to meet those kids. You got to meet those families. You got to make sure every kid feels wanted. And you got to develop. You got to develop. That's the grassroots. That's the foundation of your program once those kids get to high school. And you got to make sure that those kids, no matter if they're 8, 9, 10, 11, you got to make sure that those kids are coming along each and every year. And if you can do that, and you can get some kids that should be public school kids. You can get some kids, sway some parents to, enroll their kids, in the Boylan. They want a phenomenal education, but also too, they want to be part of a winning culture. That's the way. I think that's the way you have to do it. I think you got to go to your junior tackle programs, wherever those coaches are down there, and ask those guys, are you with me? Are you all in?
Yeah, and I think, not to make light of the situation, but it reminds me of, do you want to be more like the Pittsburgh Steelers where you went from Cowher to Tomlin, or do you want to be more like the Cleveland Browns where you went from Freddie Kitchens to Stefanski? Like, not to make light of the situation, but like that's the comparison. You want stability like the Steelers, or do you want to be every 5 years getting a new coach where the program turns over and you can't find the right guy? And, going down to the youth level, it is definitely something. You need to talk to those coaches. You need to talk to the players. But just as importantly, you have to talk to the parents. You have to get them invested to bring them to the additional workouts, the off-season training, understanding what your vision is to move it forward. That, Tim, is being an elite trainer in Rockford. You need all those things.
And I think, guys, I think looking at the situation, in, if Cacciatore would have stayed, let's hypothetical. If Coach Cacciatore would have stayed, what would 2026 would have looked like? We don't know. We don't know. He could have come out and shocked the entire country and gone 9-0. Now, some people are watching this saying, you're a little over top with that comment. Well, you never know. You never know. It could have been just a really bad year or a down year for Boylan. I don't know what they have coming up through the pipeline, but I'm sure they got some decent athletes coming up through the pipeline. But I think over there, it's about, getting back to sustaining that dominance that we once had back in the 90s, early 2000s, in the mid 2000s, getting back to that level of play, being able to attract, some of the kids, some of the upper echelon athletes from the actual city. How do we get those kids? How do we get those kids over here in our program? We did it in the past. We were able to do it in the past. How do we get back to that? And that's something also too, that head coach is coming in, whoever this individual is, he's going to have to sit down and really put together a really good strategy to where, he's able to actually lure kids in to his program, being honest, doing it, but he's able to attract, the Keyshawn Taylors, he's able to attract the Tilshans. He's able to attract the Webbers. He's able to attract, the Ben Bookers. How do we get those types of kids back into our program?
And I just want to say quickly from my point of view, for someone who's been in Rockford for not too long, but hearing about, the Boylan tradition and everything, from what I've seen and from what I hear from kids now at the high school level, there's no reason to go to Boylan. Like at least from the kids' point of views, why, if anything, what I've seen are kids transferring away from Boylan and going to the public schools, going to Harlem, going to Jefferson. That's what's been popular as of late.
Drew, I think you see that, but it's not common.
Okay.
You see it, but it's not common.
I'm just speaking of the time that I've been here.
Right. But I have to shed some light on this. But I think, Williams, for example, okay, let's keep it real. Williams transferred because what? He wasn't happy. He knew that if he stayed at Boylan, he probably wasn't going to play the quarterback position. Okay. Now, could he have played somewhere else? He probably could have played at the receiver position. They probably could have lined him up in the backfield. But again, his reason for leaving was due to what was in front of him. He knew he had no chance of being the starting quarterback. And the starting quarterback's dad is the head coach. I'm not saying that's right, but you have to look at all these things of why kids may transfer out of Boylan, and I think some kids come over there think it's going to be different than what it is. I don't always necessarily think that when the athlete comes over there, now he wants to leave because things are not, so to speak, of what they were cracked up to be. I just think sometimes kids think that going to a Boylan, Boylan's synonymous with winning. And I think a lot of kids think that, Boylan's, the top team, top 1-2 teams in the Nick 10 each and every year. Drew, I agree with you. I think things have changed. I think, now we're seeing Guilford at the top of the conference. We're seeing the Belvedere North at the top of the conference, and I think we're going to continue to see those teams being at the tops of the conference because, again, Drew, as you just alluded to, a lot of kids are wanting to stay in their home area schools and not one.
Yeah, and I'm no by any means trying to bash Boylan. I'm just saying if kids are going to transfer to Boylan, they got to give them a reason to. Like you said, like all these decades they've been, the top dog in the conference. No, everyone, I'm sure all the top kids wanted to go to Boylan, but now why would I'm just putting myself in the kids' shoes of B North, Guilford, Harlem. Why, you're a 7, 8, 9 win team. You got to give me a reason to go to Boylan. Now they're getting a new head coach. So I'm just speaking from the outside looking in. If those were my shoes, you got to give me a reason why. Right. So hopefully Boylan, they get a great head coach who has some ties in the Rockford area, can present that. Say, hey, we're getting back to Titan football. And that's what you got to hope they can do.
Right. And there's probably a few more factors like kids, parents don't want to send their kids over there. Is it the actual tuition nowadays? Tuition's over $8-9 grand, I think. It's hard, financially to send your kids to Boylan, and that's why, Boylan has such a great program, over there where they can find donors for kids. They can find, they can subsidize, certain, athletes to come over there, rather they're paying a certain percentage or rather they're paying anything at all. I think that's attractive. If you want your kid to get a great education. I'm not saying that Guilford doesn't have a great curriculum. I'm not saying that East doesn't have a great curriculum. I'm not saying that Auburn doesn't have a great curriculum. What I'm saying is that I think a lot of kids, a lot of kids may not have the financial, a lot of families may not have the financial means to send their kids to a Boylan or a Rockford Christian or a Lutheran.
Yeah.
Even covering football at the lower level, we saw what happened to Lutheran this year. They almost had to forfeit the season because they didn't have enough kids. So, it's not even just the top level, private schools. Lutheran, you bring that up. I remember going to a few of their games, and I think they barely had – I don't even think they had 20. So, it's something I think Rockford Christian over the years have gone through the same thing as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe Lutheran had about 18 kids. If I'm not mistaken, I do believe that they had 18 kids. I know we did some work over there this past summer, so I'm familiar with those numbers. I think it was about 18 kids, and a lot of those kids were a blend of, football guys, basketball guys, but they made it work. So, again, I think right now, you look at all the parochial programs, all these schools. You look at Rockford Christian, you look at Lutheran, you look at Boylan. Who else am I missing? I think just those three that you look at.
Well, guys, think about this.
Hold on a second, Harold. I think all these schools are hurting. Think about it. I think all these schools are seeing the actual wrath of low enrollment. I know Rockford Christian's down. They had to consolidate. Put all the kids in one building. I know Lutheran's numbers are down. Boylan's numbers are down. So it's pretty ubiquitous amongst the actual parochial programs here. I don't think kids are saying, "Oh, I don't want to go to Boylan. I don't want to go to Lutheran." No, I think it comes down to dollars and cents, fellas. I really do. That's both schools are all three of those schools that I just alluded to, 8,000 and up, and not everybody wants to actually allot that type of money, for their kids to go to schools when they can possibly get that from a public school. They can get it from a Guilford. Guilford's got a good curriculum. They can get it from the East. They have a good curriculum. They can get it from Auburn. They have a good curriculum, So I think there's a variable of things of why these parochial programs are starting to see a huge dip, so to speak, in enrollment, and it's impacting the volume of athletes that come out for these individual sports.
Well, yeah, and I just go back to something that happened on the basketball court, which is Freeport Aquinas. They closed up, right? And they had Peyton, and she left there, and now she's playing for Freeport, and she's going to be a Division I athlete there. And she went there. She obviously left Freeport Aquinas because they closed. And I just look at the all-conference list for Nick 10. 2 players on the first team all-conference left. I believe it was Lutheran, Malachi Richardson and Gavin Sanders. Didn't they both play at Lutheran, right? And so they left to play at a
Ballard, the quarterback, Ballard. He was one that transferred to. Yep, Ballard. Yep.
So like we're
left,
seeing the effects of that at the upper levels of the Nick 10, and I don't know because I'm not smart enough to know how to flip that, but
I think also too and I can speak to this very candidly because I know a few of the kids that transferred into some of these public schools from private schools. I think a lot of these kids are looking to just play better competition, so to speak. They want to be they don't want to be the big fish in a small pond. Instead, what they want to try to do is try to prove themselves on a higher level, so to speak, to where they think that they'll be able to attract more attention from scouts. And that's not always the case. You look at the history of Byron. How many Division I collegiate athletes have they pumped out? You look at Stillman, how many Division I, D2 ball players have scholarship kids have they pumped out? So I don't think it's necessarily, a thing where, we're going to start to see a lot of parochial kids leave these parochial institutions and then say, screw it, I'm just going to go to a public school for the next year or two. Because again, if you look at Gavin Sanders and you look at Ballard, well, they decided to transfer their senior year. Did it do them any good? I don't know.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, Richardson, he transferred out, and now he's signed with Tennessee Tech, Division I school. So you have both sides of the equation.
And I agree with you, Harold. I mean, would he have gotten that type of attention if he stayed at Lutheran? Think about it. Would he have gotten that type of attention if he stayed at Lutheran? I can't answer that.
In my opinion, I don't think there's any way he gets that exposure. You have Messiah Tilson and Keeson Taylor on that team. They get exposure. They
open up doors for you. Yes,
they open up.
They open up doors for you. I've always said that. I always said, kids, to athletes, you be at your best at all times. You never know who's in the stands. They may not be coming to watch you on Friday night, but if you have a damn good football game or a damn good basketball game, they see that you have the potential to play maybe at that level. You have some intangibles that stuck out to them. You may get a call. You may get a what do you call that? X, not Twitter anymore, but X. You may get somebody in your inbox from the University of Tennessee or the University of North Carolina in your inbox. You don't know. So that's why I always try to tell kids, always be at your best, whether you're in practice, no matter if you're in practice or if it's a game. Always be at your best because you never know who's watching. Yep. So yes, Harold, I'm with you. Yep. I don't know if he would have gotten that attention if he stayed at Lutheran.
Yeah, I don't either. And I grew up in the idea of you play with who you grew up with all the way through. But I'm an old man. That's not the way it is now. If you want to go play a better competition, or you think you have a better opportunity to play against better competition in the world we live in currently, you get that. I don't care if it's at the high school level or the collegiate level. You get to do that. You get to control that. And I just hope that Boylan finds the right coach to turn around and flip the switch on that program, that they can get them back moving in the right direction and stabilize the program so they can move forward. And working with the youth program there is a huge thing.
And Harold, let's be realistic here. I mean, that's not going to happen overnight.
No.
So whoever Coach Cacciatore's successor, he has to understand, this is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process. Whether it's a short process or a long process remains to be seen. But you got to get somebody back into that seat in that program that's going to actually just reset the program, because nothing's really broken. They just need a reset. They need a big reset. And I think whoever this coach is coming in, I think he knows that.
Yeah, I would say this though. This new incoming coach for Boylan can look at another program in the Nick 10 that flipped the script recently, and that would be Harlem. When Coach Morrill came back in the program, he's got them at the top of the conference. What's to say Boylan can't do the same sort of thing? Right. Nothing. Yeah. There's nothing there. Yeah. So they can look at that as a coaching staff and say, hey, look, Harlem did this. Why can't we do this? We have the same facilities. We have the same kids. We can do this. Let's move forward on it. So there is a template out there to do it within the Nick 10. Hopefully they hire the right guy and the staff to do that.
Yeah. I know they're taking their time. They're not in a hurry to, jump the gun, so to speak, and make a rash decision and bring somebody in that just doesn't fit. I know the administration over there fairly well. I know they're going to do their due diligence, so to speak, of finding this this successor for Coach John Cacciatore to take over the Titans. Guys, let's continue to move on. Let's get over to the Guilford Vikings. Guilford obviously finished 8-2, 2025. Lost to Chicago St. Rita in the playoffs. I believe, Drew, you were at that game, 30-20 in the first round. Drew, is that accurate? You shot that game, correct?
Yeah, yep. I was there, and it was a game. It was very interesting.
What were your guys?
I remember. If you want me to elaborate, I can.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and elaborate on this real quick, Drew, if you can.
Yeah, first thing I recall is turnovers. I remember initially there was a pick six. I think it was the first offensive possession. It might have been the first offensive play for Guilford, and that kind of set the tone for St. Rita. I know they went into halftime with the lead, but then the second half, Guilford started to find their groove. Messiah Tilson. I know in my highlights I said there was a bat signal for Messiah Tilson in the air, and man, he had a heck of a performance on offense and defense. But unfortunately, they ran out of time at the end, and my biggest takeaway was the turnovers. You go to your first play or first offensive drive, pick six. Man, it's going to be hard to come back against a good team like St. Rita, who very physical. I mean, their line was huge. They had some great playmakers. The quarterback, he was a heck of a player as well. But yeah, I just think one thing I remember right away was but I also remember, you got Keeson Taylor, Messiah Tilson, and I'm looking at Guilford. I'm like, they can play with these guys. Like, I started thinking until next year with Weber coming back, you lose Messiah, but you get Keeson. Like, Guilford can hang with St. Rita in the CCL. I remember that was such a big conversation heading into the game. I remember I even did the game preview, interviewing the coach, and I remember him saying, we got to bring our best. This is the CCL. I played in the CCL, and outside of the turnovers, they can compete. They were down 23-6 at half, and then came back and made it a close game. So shoulda, woulda, coulda. Those early turnovers killed Guilford, but man, they hung in there and they had their chances for sure.
Yeah. Harold?
Yeah, for me, I got to see the second half of the game, so I didn't see the first half of the game. Drew, you were there. My question would be to you. So Guilford ended the season playing Rockford East and Boylan Catholic, two very dominating victories. Do you think that played a part into the slow start for Guilford in that game? And before they beat Freeport as well. So they finished the season Freeport, East, and Boylan. That's how they finished the regular season. And then they really had to step their game up against St. Rita. Do you think, from your position on the sidelines there, do you think that kind of played a part in it taking a while for them to get their motor up and running?
Yeah, in one sense you can argue, you were building their chemistry, they were getting their win streak. They were, you could argue that, but then you could also argue like, well, hey, let's look at the competition, and then boom, St. Rita. So yeah, I think you have to take that, into consideration of the teams they just played for the last month, and then who they're about to play in the playoffs on a big stage. It was a packed house. I absolutely.
Yeah, guys, you guys are both, hitting the nail on the head, giving your analysis. I appreciate that. But, I'm just looking at, the Guilford team that we saw through the year make good strides and get in the playoffs. They draw powerhouse St. Rita, in round one. Blessed to have a home game against the powerhouse program. So you got some things going your way, you would think, right? And you look at, what they were able to do in that game, but just really weren't able to sustain drives. I know, you talked about a little bit about the pick six, Weber threw the pick six, and you look at the type of game that, we saw from Taylor, had a phenomenal game. I think in terms of matchup wise, I think Guilford matched up well. I just think in that game, I think Guilford just really didn't capitalize on the opportunities when they had them.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think just going into halftime down 23-6, you come out the second half, you guys got to make some plays happen. You make those plays happen thanks to Messiah Tilson. And Keeson Taylor, I'm pretty sure, had an incredible catch, toe tapper. You get your playmakers going, but then you're putting your defense behind. They have to get a stop. They have to get a turnover. And you can't always rely on that, especially against a good team like St. Rita, who I don't remember who the running back was, but he could really run the ball behind those big boys. So at the end of the day, they just ran out of time there at the end.
Right. Yeah. And you look back at the regular season, Guilford in the Nick 10, I mean, they pretty much ran through the conference. I think only game that they were challenged in was week 1 against Belvedere North. But you look at the rest of the way, I mean, they pretty much just ran the table. I thought that was pretty impressive to see them actually run the table the way that they did, coming off that sour loss in week 1, playing over there at Belvedere North, but as it relates to, their progression week in, week out, I did see Guilford get better and better and better. I saw better defense from Guilford week in and week out. I thought Weber did a phenomenal job compared to his sophomore year, really grew up, very definitely matured in a lot of areas, probably in my eyes, in my estimation, probably the best quarterback that we had in our conference this year. Some would disagree, and that's fine. But what he was able to do, with that offense and utilize the weaponry that he had, getting Taylor involved in the passing game, being able to come up big with Taylor and then adding Lopez to the actual mix of the passing game, to where he was actually hitting, 4 or 5 receivers each and every game. I think that's what you want out of your quarterback. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Guilford does in 2026. Obviously, they lose some key players. They lose Tilson. You can't replace a guy like that. They lose Porter, who had a phenomenal season. I think Guilford was probably one of the better. You guys may or may not agree with me, but I thought Porter was probably one of the better running backs, if not one of the best running backs in our conference this year. Definitely deserved that all-conference praise that he got. Jackson leaves. He was a kid that lined up in the backfield sometimes. Didn't play a lot on offense, but he played sparingly. He was a factor. Then you lose, your 2 linemen. You lose Tickner. You lose Richardson on that offensive line. So I think Guilford's got some holes to fill. I think they're going to be able to fill them. Cap's coming back, obviously, as head coach. I think he's going to continue to raise his stock, raise his game, so to speak, and become the head coach that I know he's capable of being. So I think Guilford's really in good hands, guys. I think they got some talent coming up through the pipeline, and I think we're going to be talking about Guilford a whole lot, fellas, in 2026.
Yeah, I think the barometer of their program has to be Weber. He's got to continue to improve. He's got to improve in some areas where I think he struggled at a little bit in some of the games against North and against Harlem. He struggled a little bit as well, I would say, although they got the victory in that. He just needs to, and the guys around him as well need to get better on the outside. Obviously, they lose Tilson and lose a couple other guys, but they do have some younger kids that are pretty athletic on their freshman team. And I would assume some of those kids are going to come up as sophomores on the varsity. I don't know how Cap's going to decide to do that, but Weber needs to be the catalyst. He needs to be the leader of that team and that program. And I would expect him to be. I've had conversations with him over the winter here. I'd expect him to continue to grow and develop and just talk to the other kids on the team and just understand and get to know them more. Obviously, when you have guys like Keeson and you have Messiah out there, I don't want to say it's easy. Nothing's easy, but it does make the game a lot simpler if you have those talented athletes out there. And then you also have the big fellows up front that took care of you as well. I'm excited to see what sort of steps he takes this offseason. I know, Tim, you're really high on Weber. You think he's just a phenomenal football player. I've met him. He seems like a great kid. And I know that the Ivy League is looking at him for schools up there because he's a brilliant student. So, he's got a bright future ahead of him, and he's got one more year there at Guilford. I'm excited to see what happens in 2026.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I think with Taylor coming back, as formidable as he was defensively and the things that he was able to do offensively, really showing the conference and really showing scouts his versatility, because if you look at their offense, he was involved heavily in their offense. If you look at their defense, obviously he stood out like a sore thumb, so it's going to be interesting to see, what type of player he comes back in 2026. I think he's going to come back a lot different than what a lot of people anticipate. I think he's going to be able to attract more scouts. I think he's going to be able to do, and everything that I'm saying right now that I think he's going to do, it's all going to be predicated on his offseason. If this young man goes out and he has a phenomenal offseason, the offseason of his lifetime. Let me just put that out there. Offseason of his lifetime. I think we're going to see somebody that's going to be very, 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 very formidable in our conference on both sides of the ball. I think Weber, he and Weber are going to, and looking at the passing game in our conference and looking at the quarterbacks, obviously you have Fawcett. He's got Cook over there and he's got McClellan over there to throw to. But I'm looking at what Guilford is probably going to be able to do in that passing game because, again, you can line Keyshawn Taylor up at the tight end spot. You can flank him out. You can spread the field. I think he's got enough speed to where he can actually help you stretch the field to be able to run some intermediate stuff and dump the ball when needed if you don't have the deep stuff. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these two come back. And I think they're going to come back on the same page because, again, just by having these two young men that we're alluding to right now on the podcast this past season in 2025, I think there's a connection there. There's a bond there. And I think you have to have that as a quarterback and as a tight end, even though Keyshawn, to me, can play on the other side of the ball as well. He may end up playing at the next level, at that linebacker position or that rush edge position, but definitely showing his marketability, so to speak, to the scouts throughout the country. So it's going to be interesting to see what that tandem can actually put out there on the gridiron in 2026. I think they're going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I misspoke.
Yeah.
Keyshawn is a junior. He's coming back next year. He's probably the biggest mismatch, I'd say, offensively in the entire conference. If you look from a skill position, wide receiver, tight end perspective, there's probably no one like him from a size, speed perspective than in the entire conference. And I think him and Weber are going to continue to connect. I think towards the end of the season and definitely in that playoff game, you saw Taylor step his game up big time, and I'd expect him to continue to do that. He's just sometimes some games you just look at him, he's like, are you still in high school? Because you seem like you're a third-year junior in college. I mean, sometimes you just watch him and he is an absolute man-child against some of the kids he plays against. It is really impressive to watch him play the game of football. And if he can just light that switch or whatever he has to do to get himself prepared each and every Friday night and just be the dominant force that he knows he can be and others have seen in him, the sky's the limit for the kid.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're definitely gonna be a treat to watch. I'm excited for 2026, guys. Guys, let's keep moving. Let's get to Auburn High School. Auburn went 1-8, 2025 in the conference. Lost their final 4 games. Guys, as Coach McFadden enters his 3rd season as we go into 2026, guys, what are some of the things that you guys have seen? I think Drew, you've been here since he's taken over the head coach there at Auburn. What are some of the things that we've seen in the program since Coach McFadden has taken over as head coach? Have we seen any progression?
Yeah, I mean, I look back to some of those games and you see, they competed with Belvedere 39-36. First game of the year, they competed with Hano 27-15. Both of those were losses, but, they were competing. A lot of the games that I went to, it was just a lot of little things they still got to work. A lot of flags, just silly mistakes, which takes time, and he'll continue to sharpen those things up and as the more kids come through with the program. But I think that was my biggest thing is just, from game 1 to the end of the season, are they making less of the silly mistakes? Do they look more sharp? Right. They look more together? Are they working together? Are the games close? And I think we did see that. I think we did. Yeah, you end the year to a loss, Jefferson 30-0, but Jefferson was playing for the playoffs. So other than that, I think that's my main takeaway.
Right. I guess my big thing is you look at what they did in this first year, and you look at what they did in 2025, and you look back and you say, okay, what type of improvement did they really make? And Drew, I know you spoke candidly about what you saw that they made. I think now the big step that Coach McFadden needs to make, he's got to have a winning season. He's got to have a winning season now. And I think he's capable of doing that. I think he's got some good athletes coming up from the sophomore level. I know he played a lot of sophomores this past season, so he's got some kids running back. Obviously, you lose Sanders, and then you lose Ballard, and you lose some other key pieces. But how do you bring that program along? Because I think right now or he's sitting going into his third year in 2025. I think it's time, for us to be able to see Auburn get in that winning column a little bit more than we've had in the last couple seasons. And I think they're capable of doing that.
Yeah, as far as my thoughts on Auburn, it's very concerning to me that the two transfer kids, Ballard and Sanders, came in and they essentially led the football team, led the football program. So where are the kids that have been in the Auburn program for 2-3 years now? Where are they? Where are they filling in? Where are they being the guys that are being the playmakers that are leading the program ahead? I didn't see that. I'm going to be frank, and it concerns me because they do have low numbers as well. We talked about Boylan having low numbers, but Auburn and the East both have low numbers. I know I saw a roster of theirs at the end of last year, and they had less than 30 kids on their varsity team. That's a shocking number for a public high school in Rockford to have less than 30 kids on their roster. If that's true,
Right.
They need to jumpstart this program, and they need to get closer to 500. Because I don't know how you turn it around at Rockford Auburn if you're not, say, 3-6.
Yeah,
And
Harold,
you need close to that.
Yeah, and Harold, just to cap on what you're saying, I just think that you can't, if you're trying to build a program, okay, which Coach McFadden is trying very hardly to do. If you're trying to build a program, you got to put some wins up on the board. You got to win more than one game. Okay. You got to win more than two games, because again, what you end up doing, some kids, and I've seen this, some kids don't want to go out for the team the following year, because they were so bad, the year prior, so you in order for you to be able to not experience that, to where kids quitting and kids getting in trouble or whatever the case may be, you have to, you got to lay down the foundation. What's your foundation? What's your identity? Who are you guys? Who are the Auburn Knights? And I think it's time now for Coach McFadden and his staff to really turn that page over there. And if they haven't already, really truly lay that foundation down, because you have a bunch of athletes in your program. You were able to get two kids, as Drew would say, from the transfer portal that came over from Lutheran. Okay. Those kids stuck out like a sore thumb. They were playmakers within the Nick 10, but those were only two of the 28 or 30 players that you had on your team. Okay. So, if you look at it in actuality, they just didn't have the depth. How are we bringing our other kids along that have been in our program, Harold, as you just alluded to? How are we bringing those kids along year in and year out? You got two kids that come from a parochial program that are able to come in and interject the program, so to speak, become starters, become very valuable offensive players, become threats. Where are these other kids that are actually have been in your system for 2 or 3 years? Are they now playing different positions? Have they quit? So you have to have the right system in play in order for you to, as a head coach, to be able to be very competitive here in this conference. Because Coach McFadden, he's a competitor, but I think what he needs to do, he needs to figure out, okay, how do I get this train on the track, and how do I keep it on the track? Because you don't want to continue to go through this roller coaster where, okay, 1 year you're 500, next 5 or 10 years you're below 500. You've only won 3 games in 5 years. To me, that's a program that's in much duress. And I think in order for programs to stay out of that realm, so to speak, of that duress that I just mentioned, you have to develop your lower levels. Your lower levels has to be your priority. It has to be consequential to you and your coaching staff, because if it's not, these are the types of actually seasons that we're going to actually see year in and year out.
Yeah, Tim, I've been talking to a couple of people within the Rockford football community, the youth programs. It seems like the entire Rockford youth football program is a little splintered. They don't have a cohesive direction, and a school will go here, a youth program will go here, and then they'll go here, and then they'll bounce around. I think that's something, we talked about it in Boyland, and we talked about it at Hananiga, and we talked about it at all the successful programs. You need to put your arms around the youth program and develop that so that they understand your vision, your culture, and your positive nature, so that they can then grow with you as you get better. Coach Leroy, I can't stress this enough. He has to get more successes, and they might not come in the W column, but I'm just looking at the schedule from last year. 2 out of 9 games, they were competitive. All the rest of the games were 3 touchdowns or more. You have to be competitive. You have to do something, because if you want those players to buy into what you're doing, Tim, and you know this, you have to show some success. Even if you lose, but if you lose by less than 7 points, you can say, hey, 1 play here, 1 play there, 1 more rep, 1 more run, whatever it is. That's what's going to get those kids to come back each and every year. Successful programs, you hear them talk about the fact that they get 40 and 50 kids into their off-season training. If they're not training, they're playing a sport. If they're not playing a sport, they're in the weight room. They're doing something. I don't know, without positive reinforcement for these kids, how you get them to buy in. And that's got to be the hardest thing for a high school coach in a culture where winning is everything, success is everything, is how you get those kids to keep coming back. And I think winning football games is great, but the first step has to be, we need to be competitive on Friday nights. We need to scratch and claw to be competitive every single Friday night. And then you need to talk to the parents about, here's what we need from you, because you have to have the parents buy in. So that the kids
And Harold, you just alluded to something. This is where I was going next. You have to have parent involvement. Okay. And the more I've seen this in other places, the more parent involvement you have, the more buy-in you're going to get from your athletes. Because now that they know mom and dad are behind this head coach in this program, I need to get behind it 10 steps more, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the problem. I don't know for sure, I'm surmising, but I think that's part of the problem over at Auburn. He's not getting the buy-in from some of these from parents. And I think he has to put together a strategy. He has to come up with an approach to where he's going to be able to galvanize these parents and get their buy-in. I think that can help you. It may not help you win games. I think it can lead to that, but I think it'll help you hold kids more accountable. I think it'll help you get more kids into the weight room during the off season. And I think it can be a very integral piece to the success of your program.
Yeah, Tim, and me and you both know, we know Coach McFadden understands what success looks like. He understands what he needs to get there. He just needs to now begin to implement it with his coaches and those parents. Like that's because this is his 3rd go round. He should have all the things set into place.
Yep. Going through his 3rd season.
Yeah, you gotta get it moving in the right direction. Because if you don't get it, at some point they're gonna cut bait and move on from you as football players and parents. They're going to do that if they don't see success or movement. That's why I think that's why I bought into Belvedere so much, because I saw it and I heard it. I heard the positive nature that was going on there, right? I'm not hearing that from Auburn. I'm not hearing that from East, and we'll get to East in, I'm sure, a little bit, but I'm not hearing those things, and that's concerning to me. As an outsider, I don't see those things or hear those things when I'm on the campus or I'm around those kids or around some of the boosters.
And in these programs that are actually suffering, you as a head coach, you have to be able to, if you went 1-8 in year 1, and you come back out, you go 1-8 again in year 2, after that first time you went 1-8, you need to be really, you got to be calculated about what you need to do in year 2. Understand what you did wrong in year 1 and create a plan, put together a strategy to ensure that those things that you didn't do well in year 1, they're not part of year two. I think that needs to be the approach over there at Auburn. I think he needs to understand, okay, this is what we weren't successful doing. No matter if we weren't successful with getting 80% participation in the weight room, or we weren't successful with, having, 200 yards a game, in our run game, whatever it may be, you have to figure it out as a head coach, and as coaches, you need to figure out how to be better the following year. Because if you're not doing that immediately after the season, if you're not trying to figure out and spending time with the things that you didn't do well in 2025, and now we're in 2026, if you haven't figured it out in 2025, then you may have the same outcome in 2026. Okay. And the point that I'm trying to make is that immediately after the season, Auburn's last game, those coaches should have been together in one room, figuring out what is broken. What's broken?
Yep.
What are we not doing as coaches? What are we not delivering? What are we not conveying to our families? What are we not conveying to our athletes? Why are we not getting at least 75 participation in the weight room when we know we should be, when we know we can? Because I think sometimes a lot of coaches, they get jobs, not saying Auburn, not saying this is Coach McFadden, but I think sometimes coaches get jobs and they get satisfied and they become content. And they never want to come up with a resolution to why things aren't going the way that they should go. I'm not saying that's Coach McFadden. I'm not saying that's any coach within the Nick 10. I'm just saying I've seen that before. And that's what I call a recipe for debacle. It's a train wreck. You cannot think as a head coach or as a coach, you're going to really be able to assemble and develop a program. Develop. The operative word here, develop. You're not going to be able to develop a program if you can't get to your kids. You can't get your kids to buy in. And I think that's the problem. I think that's part of the problem that we're seeing with some of these programs. You're just not getting enough buy-in from your kids.
Yeah.
And that can become very demoralizing for a coach to where he just capitulates.
Yep.
He's sick and tired of trying to, get kids to 7-on-7 during the summer. He's sick and tired of trying to get more kids in the weight room. But as a head coach, you were chosen as a head coach for a reason. You were chosen as a head coach for a reason. These are the things that you knew exactly what it was that you were dealing with before you took the job. This is nothing new. Now, you were hired to be able to come in and correct the issues. That's why you were hired. Not to allow these things to continue to manifest. No, you were actually hired to come in and ensure that you were going to be able to preclude all these things that are keeping you guys from being a 500 program, as you just alluded to earlier, a 500 program. That's why you were hired. We believe in you. Administration tells these coaches, we believe in you. You're our guy. Well, as a head coach, you got to know you're that guy. And you have to be able to deal with adversity, but also too, you have to understand what your program needs are. What do we need? Where do we need to be better? And just get it done.
Yep. And Tim, I've had the opportunity this winter to kind of talk with a few folks around the program. They're not involved in the program, just around the program. And my first question was, so what does Auburn Night football look like? What do you stand for? What do you want other teams to say about your program and about your players? To a man, they can't really answer the question. And that is probably the biggest sign of the Knights need a re-energized program. And I'm not saying a new coach. I'm just saying that a new philosophy to move forward to improve your program. If anyone who is on the peripheral of your program cannot say, we stand for this, we want to be known every Friday night as a defensive stalwart, we want to be able to run the football, and we want to punch the other team in the mouth every single Friday night. That's what we want to do. Sure, it's words, but everyone should understand what those words mean and understand. Right. I mean, look at I'm just going to take the top teams in the conference. You know what Belvedere North stands for. You know what Hononegah stands for. You now know what Jefferson stands for. Like, you know that you don't need to be in the program to know what they stand for. That's what the Auburn Knights need. They need that. And because then
Harold,
the kids buy it.
Harold, let's admit, kids are different today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's not easy being a head coach. But you have to understand you're a head coach for a reason. You were hired for a reason, because the administration who hired you or the AD who hired you, thought that you were the one, you were the chosen one, so to speak. So, I think, as it pertains to Auburn, I think Coach McFadden just really needs to, figure this thing out. He's got to really figure it out. How he does it remains to be seen. Can he do it in 2026? Remains to be seen. But I think time is of the essence. I think the administration and the alumni, they want to see Auburn back in that top 3, top 4. They want to see Auburn back in the conversation. Because let's just be honest, Auburn's been out of the conversation for some years now.
Yeah, they absolutely have.
And I think Auburn Nation, Knight Nation, is they're famished. They're famished. They're starving. They want to be known. They want to be relevant. And right now, Auburn's not relevant.
Yeah,
they're not relevant.
Absolutely.
I can't sit here and lie to you and say Auburn's relevant. I can't sit here and lie to you and say Auburn's one of the better teams, top 3 teams in our conference. No, they're not. They're not. They're one of the worst teams in our conference. But it's up to the head coach and his coaches to ensure that the program is moving in the right direction. We're bringing our kids along the best way we can, and we're doing it this way, and we're doing it with integrity.
Yeah. And I just want to say this, Tim, I was the one who kind of jumped off on this diving board here. We want to see success for Auburn. We want to see success for every single Nick 10 team. And we are pointing out things that we see that we hope next year at this time, we're not having this conversation. We're talking about Auburn finishing wherever they want to finish, middle to upper part of the conference. I would love to have that pie in my face every single day if that's what happens. Right. We are not here bashing or being hard on Auburn for any other reason than we're talking about them and what we see.
And Harold, if this makes you feel better, man, I know a lot of those coaches over there, and I think a lot of those guys would agree to disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think for the most part, I think they would agree with me. I think they know what's at stake. They know what they need to do. They just need to get back, together and really figure this thing out because, none of those guys over there are losers. They're all winners. He's got a staff full of winners, but how do you build something? How do you build this thing is the actual ultimate question. How do we build a program? How do we get better each and every year? Because to me, that's a program. You're evolving each and every year. You're evolving. Now, will there be some years where, you may, fall off a little bit, maybe a year. I'll grant you a year. I'll give you grace for a year, but no more excuses of having, not won a game in 4 years or in 5 years, or have only won one game in 4 years, 5 years. Those days are gone. Those days are gone, and I think Coach McFadden's, I think they're going to rise to the occasion. I think they're going to put together a really good product out there on the field for 2026. But it starts with the coaches. It starts with them. And I think he knows that.
He does. And I'm excited to kind of be around the program. Hopefully this spring and summer, maybe at the 7-on-7 thing that Drew mentioned a little bit, that might be happening. I'm excited to see what growth they get, because they need growth to move forward. And 2026, a new year, can't do anything about 2025 or 2024. Can only talk about 2026.
Yep. Agreed. Harold, we're going to continue to move forward. We're almost wrapping up here, close to the end. Team that we saw last year, we thought that made some really, really good strides, and they did. Jayhawks' first time in playoff appearance in 32 years. Harold, let's talk a little bit about some of the growth that we've both witnessed with Jefferson this year. We don't have to really shed too much light on what they didn't get done in the playoffs because, again, they played Brother Rice. I mean, we kind of knew what the outcome was going to be. Let's talk about the progression that we saw this year, with the Jayhawks through week 9.
So the biggest indicator of where Jefferson saw the improvement was, I would say, I'm going to call out one guy in particular. I don't normally do this. Mike Townsend Jr. What a senior campaign that kid had. What a senior campaign. In that Brother Rice game, I will tell you a quick little tidbit that I heard. So Brother Rice got on the PA system when Mike Townsend went out, and they announced that Mike Townsend was leaving the game. And the Brother Rice fans gave him a standing ovation. That's how impactful he was in that singular game.
Right.
But that's what he did for the Jefferson program. It was incredible, the growth that you saw from his junior year to his senior year. I hope he gets the opportunity to play at the next level because I think he has a huge, huge growth potential. And he's got a lot of talent there. And I think Jefferson has the right coach there. They have the right culture. They're moving things ahead. They got 40 to 50 guys in the weight room 3 times a week. They're banging it away. I talked to Coach, at a recent basketball game. He's excited about the opportunity. He loves the kids that are in the program. He loves what's moving forward. I just was really impressed with the growth that we saw from the previous year till this year, just the changes that they made. Obviously, they got Williams, the quarterback. So that's going to be the biggest key for them in 26. Who's going to play quarterback?
Because you lose some key players. Obviously you just alluded to Williams. You lose Roby, who was an impact player, and then you lose Townsend. We know what caliber player he was. But it's going to be interesting to see, their progression. Again, we saw it this year in 2025 compared to 2024. What I want to see is sustainability. Was this the start of something in 2024, or was it just a low season in the Nick 10, so to speak, where a lot of teams weren't that good, and then some of your bottom teams that have been bottom teams for years were able to climb up into the middle of the pack? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep, but I think Jefferson was a really good damn football team in 2025, and I think we're going to see something better in 2026. I think now Coach Kazaza, he understands as a head coach, he understands what it takes at the high school level. He understands what it takes, how important it is for him to be able to have his boys in the weight room getting it done and preparing the right way for 2026. I think he's done a phenomenal job of surrounding himself around really quality coaches. Ronnie Brown is one of them. Ronnie's been around for quite some time. He's an Auburn alum, a good friend of mine. He's done a phenomenal job of complimenting Kazaza, and I'm sure Kazaza is just elated to have Ronnie Brown on his staff and the other coaches as well. But when you can do that as a head coach, surround yourself with football minds, quality guys, good guys, stand up guys. I think it's only contagious. And it only spreads to your kids. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why you're seeing the buzz over at Jefferson like you're seeing. It's a different culture. It's a different culture. And again, it remains to be seen. Are we going to continue to see this year in and year out?
And I just want to give a shout out to Drew, because every time I see Kaz, he tells me to give him a shout out for it, because Drew is the one who started the process. So Drew, nice job by you.
Good job, Drew.
You take a dub on that. You take dub on that. But the other thing about them finishing 5-5 and getting to the playoffs, it allows other kids in the school who maybe didn't play football before to say, hey, you know what? I want to be part of this.
Right.
And he's now gotten a couple of those kids to be there. And maybe if a kid, and I'm not saying that there were kids that would want to transfer out of Jefferson, but if they're like, hey, I want to play for Jefferson because guess what? They have a chance to compete every Friday night, and I might get to play in the playoffs. Like, I'm going to stay at Jefferson and work. Like, those are the types of things that schools that are struggling, need to see and understand. And I think Coach Cousins, his entire staff, you mentioned Coach Brown there, he's got some younger staff members there as well they're filled with energy. It helps him a ton that he's in the school every single day. He can walk the halls. He can give kids high fives, ask them how they're doing. Hey, he can look at a kid who's not playing football, look at him and say, why aren't you playing ball? Why aren't you in with us? That's a big thing too. That is a big thing too. And I'm excited about what's in 2026 and beyond for Jefferson. If they can find the quarterback, I think they got a shot again at being near the middle of the conference. I think they do.
Yeah. Like I said, like I alluded to earlier, it's all about your off-season maturation. How am I bringing my kids along? You have to do that. You got to bring these kids along because, these kids sometimes, we can't always put things in our kids' hands that we think that they can handle. We have to, as leaders, we have to guide these kids. We have to show them, you want to be great. This is how you be great. You want to be good. This is all you have to do. You want to be average. Do this. So as leaders, we have to take full ownership in ensuring that, we're bringing every kid in our program along. I don't care if he was on the third team last year. You got to bring that kid along. I don't care if he was on the second team last year. You got to bring that kid along because that saying as well as I do. Every athlete, your starter is only a sprained ankle away from being a starter. And I think it's important that coaches adhere to that. They embrace that, and they bring these kids along, man, because you're asking these kids to come out each and every day to practice, and sweat and collide with one another. And it's a very violent sport. You're asking them to do a lot. And I think some of these kids that's all they want to see, which they've seen it over at Jefferson. Does my coach really care about me? Does my coach really care about me, or is this a facade? And I think with Coach Kazaza, I think they see his genuineness. They see that he's a very unfeigned coach, and so are the other coaches around him. So I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing the Jefferson success, so to speak.
Yep. And, you mentioned that, and Kaz is in the weight room 3 times a week. Most kids are in the weight room. That's when he's in the weight room. He's there. He's supervising the kids when they're in the weight room. He's not having an assistant coach or somebody else do that. He's there. So the kids see him. They see him sweating. They see him there, yelling and screaming when a guy hits a PR. Like, he is there. He is fully invested in the program.
It's a culture shift. That's what we're seeing.
Yep.
We're just seeing a culture shift, and I think that's what needs to happen at some of these other schools. Maybe you need to tweak your culture.
Yeah. And
maybe your culture has been the culprit.
Yep. And the thing I love most about Kaz is when you have a conversation with him, he will always say, it's bigger than football. I'm not going to send kids to the NFL. If a kid gets there, great. But guess what? He's going to be a great father. He's going to be a great employee. He's going to be a great husband. That's what we're building here. We're building young men.
Yeah, you got to develop men.
Yep.
You got to be a man of stewardship. You're a leader. You got that job for a reason. The administration over there at Jefferson saw something in you, and they were like, "Hey, we think you're the guy for the job."
Yep.
And so far I think he's done a damn good job of showing that administration, hey, you guys made a damn good decision on going with me.
Yep.
So again, Harold, let's continue to move forward. Let's get to our next team here as we're at the tail end of our show. Belvedere went 4-5 this year in 2025. Big highlight for them was they beat Hononegah 8-6 in week 9.
Yeah, that was a tremendous football game.
Yeah, really I know you were there. Obviously, we talked about, the progression of these other teams that we just highlighted earlier, but Belvedere, I know you're high on Belvedere. You think Coach Donnelly over there has done a phenomenal job, which I totally agree with you as well. But what did you see this year in 2024 compared to 2023? Was there a ton of progression, or was there just incremental progression that you saw?
As the season wore on, I saw them get better in aspects that they struggled at the beginning of the year. So Sternquist, their young sophomore quarterback, got much better as the year went on, much better at decision making, didn't turn the ball over in that Hononegah game, played a little bit sporadic, but didn't turn the ball over, kept his team in the game. They then made a play to win that football game. You know,
Right.
they had a chance to get to the playoffs. They didn't accomplish that goal. So what do you think Coach Conley and his staff is talking about all offseason?
Right.
We need to take the next step to get to the playoffs, right? So it's all positive. It's all positive there. And, you know, for a long time, I think the idea was Belvedere was second fiddle to Belvedere North. I think that was a general rule. But I think now, if you go around the Belvedere community, you're going to see a lot of purple and gold out there. You're going to see a lot of purple and white. You'll also see, obviously, the colors for Belvedere North, but you're going to see a lot of Buck Pride signs around there because a lot of the people who have been around Hononegah for a long time, or Hononegah, have been around Belvedere for a long time, they graduated from Belvedere and they want to see that program succeed again. Not that they don't want to see North succeed, but why can't they both succeed? That's what I've heard. Why can't we both succeed? We have enough kids here. We have enough talent. Coach Conley's moving it in the right direction. I think Sternquist, the young quarterback, I think I expect him to see quite a bit of growth. He's a really good baseball player. So I would, as he continues to hone his skill as a quarterback and as a football player, I would expect to see him take some leaps up in the offseason. And obviously his dad's the athletic director, so that doesn't hurt getting opportunities to be on the field at certain times, right? So I love Coach Conley. If you talk to him, his positive energy, and just at the couple of games that I was at, you can tell that the kids love him. They absolutely love him. He's invested. Go watch a wrestling match or a wrestling event. Watch those kids. They're all in. They're invested in him as a person. He's invested in them. So I just think Belvedere, I think they're trending in the right direction. Right. I could see them and Jefferson fighting for the last playoff spot next year. That's kind of what I'm looking at. You know, kind of like it was this year, right? Jefferson beat Belvedere, so they got into the playoffs. Next year, Belvedere's going to try and knock off Jefferson to get a playoff. I think that's kind of the direction I think Belvedere probably going to go.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I think, you know, what I've seen from Coach Donnelly since he's taken over the head coaching job over there at Belvedere, I've seen his progression. You know, they've made some really good progress since he's taken over as a head coach. They've made really good progress from, you know, his first year now to his second year. And I think they're going to continue to do that. I think he understands, you know, what he needs to do to actually, so to speak, galvanize, you know, that Buck country, so to speak, again, and getting back to not even the top of the conference right away. I think, you know, with him, I think it's more so, you know, we just need to be competitive. You know, we can't be going 1-8. You know, we can't be a 2-17. We need to be competitive. You know, meaning that we need to be in that 500 ball club. You know, and I think he's implemented some things that's going to allow them to do that. I know they bring some key pieces back. They bring Alvarez, the running back in 2026. And like you just alluded to earlier, Strenquist is back. You know, it's going to be interesting to see the type of growth that these two young men have this year in order to give their team an opportunity to be competitive this year in 2026. But definitely excited about their progression, Belvedere. That is their progression over the last 2 years since Coach Downley's been head coach.
Yeah, they do lose some kids. They lose Taborn, who is a first-team all-conference performer at the wideout position. But really, they're built in the running game. So the fact that Alvarez is coming back, they got a couple of younger kids that are coming back. Their JV team had some nice size along their offensive and defensive line. Yeah. So I would expect them to get bigger and stronger as they go on. I know those kids are now into the wrestling program, so they're going to learn how to feel their body and play offensive line a little bit better there. So I'd expect, you know, vast improvements along, you know, in the running game, passing game. You know, we'll have to see how far Sternquist comes and who's going to play the number one wideout position, because Taborn's going to be gone, and Taborn was a very good athlete. Right. Very good athlete.
And I think a big part of their success in 2026 is going to be predicated on, you know, how well how much maturation, so to speak, Strenquist makes over this next year. You know, again, sophomore last year, came in, did some really good things, you know, did some not so good things as well. But, you know, it's going to be interesting to see his maturation. I think, I really do believe, I think a lot of their success is going to be predicated on how well he maturated during the offseason.
Sure, and we've seen it around the conference, right, with other quarterbacks. Obviously, Fawcett with Harlem improved.
Yep.
Weber, when he stepped in as a young freshman, they improved quite a bit there. You know, quarterback is I'm never going to say it's the most key position. I don't believe it is, but it is a very key position for your program.
It's a vital position. I mean, your quarterback is your point guard. You know, what is your point guard required to do? Manage the game.
Yep.
Manage the game. You know, make sure you're not turning the ball over. You know, executing plays that you're running. I mean, getting people involved, getting the entire team involved. So, you know, that's how you got to look at the quarterback position. I think it's you know, they're the point guard of football. You know, for sure. Harold, let's continue to move forward. We'll move away from Belvedere here. Let's Freeport Pretzels. Not the season that we thought that they would have. 3-6 in 2025. Lost their last 5 games. I know Coach Detman over there. You know, the year prior they made the playoffs. He did a really good job that year. I forget what their record was that year, but you know, I kind of thought that they would come back and maybe be able to duplicate that type of performance that they had in 2024. But obviously we were wrong. So, you know, what are some of the things that you think, you know, that we didn't see from the Pretzels this year that we saw the year prior that they made when they made the playoffs?
Well, I hate to say this, you know, I don't like to point out the negatives, but at the 2 games that I saw, what I didn't see was discipline. They made some really, I wouldn't just some really boneheaded plays. They had a lot of personal foul penalties, late hits, bad penalties that put them behind the down and distance, and then their offense wasn't built to make up that. But really, it was concerning to me more the undisciplined plays that took place in the games that I saw. Again, I only saw 2 out of their 9 games. Maybe the other 9 that they did, or the other 7 they did fine. But it was very concerning regarding the undisciplined play that I did see them have this season, and that's something you can't do if you're going to be a successful team and make a run at the playoffs. Why did they lose the last 5 games of the year? It was the 5 toughest games they had all season long. I mean, so their schedule kind of managed that. But I think once the ball got rolling on, you know, their losses started to build up, they couldn't get themselves out of their own way to get that victory. They did have a shot, you know, at making the playoffs if they would have won a couple of those games. You know, they could have finished at 5-4 in the regular season. They couldn't do it. You know, they lost the last 3 games. They lost to Guilford, who, look, they're a top of the conference team, but they lost to Jefferson, you know, 10-6, and then they lost to East 28-20, which, my own opinion, the biggest shocker of the year was the 28-20 loss by them. And why did that happen? You know, undisciplined play, weren't ready to play. I don't know, but this offseason they need to get back to what they were doing in 2024 when they were a playoff team. If they don't, they're going to continue to slide into mediocrity.
Yeah, and I think also too, you know, we're not sitting here making excuses for Freeport. I thought they had some playmakers. Epps, he was one who contributed heavily his junior year. Didn't do a whole lot his senior year, which was really surprising. They try to line him up in different places to get the ball in his hand. He's a senior, so he's leaving. You know, they lose Cam Verner to graduation. We know what type of caliber player he was his senior year. You know, they just didn't, and they had some other key pieces around him as well, but they just really this year, I didn't see the playmaking ability that I saw in 2024 with the Pretzels. So again, you know, you look at, you know, what they didn't have in 2025 compared to what they had in 2024. And you talk about, you know, the discipline, you know, I didn't see that in 2024. I saw some of that in 2025. Saw him play a couple times this year. Saw some things on the sideline that I didn't think should be going on or happening. You know, some coaches had to get on a few guys because, you know, they weren't paying attention or, you know, not you know, going in the game when they needed to go in the game. You know, just very lackadaisical team that I saw this year in 2025 compared to 2024. But, you know, I wouldn't be too concerned. I just think it was just a down year for Freeport. I think Coach Detman does a phenomenal job of just really understanding, you know, what we didn't do in 25. I think in 26 he's going to come back out and correct those things and get that program back in that middle of the pack as they were in 2024.
Yeah, I think the other thing I made note of, and I had to look up the young man's name, but Thomas Olson was their quarterback last year.
Yep, sure
and
was. Yep.
I hate to say it, he plateaued. So beginning of the year, he did some nice things, but then he plateaued. He didn't really continue to raise his game.
Right.
Also interesting to note, and I just made note of this going into the game, but Freeport changed their offensive identity from year to year. In 24, they were a much heavier run team. Last year, they were more of a 50-50 pass to run. I'm not sure if that's because of the talent that they had or because they felt like they needed to do that. But it was just an interesting flip that I'm sure the coaches in the offseason, they're reevaluating that and saying, okay, we need to build our on this, whatever this is.
Yeah.
50-50 pass to run or a run team. But I just made note of that. And Olson, I didn't see the continued progression throughout the season like I was hoping. So I saw a game earlier in the year, and then I saw him against Hononegah, and it was shocking that I didn't see the development like I was hoping to see out of him.
And I would definitely agree with you. I mean, the game that I saw him play up close with my naked eye was against Guilford, and I just really didn't see the level of play that I that was accustomed to seeing. Like you said, in week 1, week 2, you look pretty good. You thought that he was the right fit for that job, and then you look at him during the end of the season, he kind of saw a dip in his performance. You got to ask why is that? Did something happen during the season? Was he not getting the attempts that he got in week 1 and week 2 and in week 8 and week 9? So there's probably a variable of things that why he had such a dip in his performance, particularly in the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. But I think moving forward, going into 2026, knowing that Coach Devon's got to be feeling real good, knowing that I have my starting quarterback coming back, and I feel pretty damn good about putting him out on the field and controlling our offense and ensuring that we're putting points on the board and we're putting our defense in the right positions week in and week out. So I don't think that's going to be a concern for Freeport going into 2026. I know he dressed a lot of young players, a lot of sophomores in 2025 that I saw on the roster. So, you can only hope that those kids are going to be able to come in and really contribute right away. You're not going to really have to, bring those kids along week in and week out. Hopefully they're ready by the season starts to where they're now juniors and they can come out and do some really good things to allow Freeport to get back into that W column, that 500 or be in the conversation, so to speak, at the end of the 2026 season.
Yeah, you mentioned the sophomores that they brought up. I remember, I think there were 6 or 7 that I remember played integral parts in that Hononegah game, and I thought, oh, that's a lot more than I remember some other teams having. I know Belvedere had a number, and as did Auburn as well. They had a number of younger kids. So hopefully those kids do grow and become better. I know they have a nice wide receiver. I believe it's Christensen or Christensen is one of the wide receivers. He's nice out there. So him and Olsen can create a connection. That's something that they can build off of offensively. Defensively,
it's always
they had some big studs in the middle. Yeah. I know they're losing those, but they do have some. I know they at least have one kid that's kind of bigger, stronger type kid. He wrestles as well. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And again, like I said, it's always good to know as a head coach and as an OC that, okay, I got one more year to bring this kid along in terms of my quarterback. He did some good things, in year 1 at the starting spot. Now we know what we need to work on during the offseason. And you hope, and you can only hope, those things that he was lacking during in 2024 and 2025, you don't see those things in 2026. So again, I think Freeport's in good shape. I think we're going to be saying something different in 2026 that we weren't able to say this year. Well-coached program. Coach Dedman is one of the better coaches, that we have in our conference. Great leader, great man, great father, great person. So again, it's going to be interesting to see, if he can get that program back into that top 3, top 4 in the conference of the Nick 10.
Harold,
we're going to continue to go ahead real quick.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm excited to see what Freeport does as well. I enjoy traveling over there. I think they have the greatest nickname in all of high school sports, the Pretzels. But that's just that's just me.
Freeport.
Pretzels.
Freeport.
Freeport.
All right, Harold, we're gonna get to we're almost done here. We're gonna get to our last team, East. E-Rabs in the building. East went 1-8, 2025. East only won. One win was against obviously the team that we just alluded to, Freeport. Freeport obviously was 3-6, but what are some of the things we kind of talked about a little bit about some of the programs within our conference. We mentioned East and Auburn about just the type of lack of success that these programs are having. As it relates to East, what have you seen over the last couple of years, and particularly last season, that you haven't seen from East in quite some time?
Well, I just don't think they have a lot of talent. I just did not think that they had a ton of talent to even compete. And that's kind of how I look at it. Like, do you have enough talent to compete with anybody in the conference? Sometimes you're not going to look. Guilford had 5 guys that are going Division I, or at least being looked at Division I. You're not always going to have the same talent as them. But like the other teams, so the Jeffersons, the Auburns, the Belvederes, like, do you have enough talent to compete at that level? I didn't actually think East did. I just don't think that they – and I don't know if it's because they don't have numbers. I heard Coach talk about that a few times, that they just don't have a number. It's a numbers game. They don't have enough infused into the program to get them to where they need to get to. That's a thing. I was really taken aback that a Rockford East didn't have the talent level to compete in a game where they were playing against a school that was of similar size, of similar location, and they just couldn't do it. And I don't know where those kids go. Did they all transfer out? Maybe. I mean, I have heard some of the kids did transfer to other schools in the Nick 10. I hope that's not the case, because I hate that for any Rockford East fan, supporter, or the coaches. Like, I don't want to see. I hate the idea of high school kids transferring in general, but so that's what I saw. Did I see some players, some nice players for them? Sure, I saw some kids have some nice plays, but not consistent plays, consistent great plays, or something that I would say would be game-changing plays in every game that's going to change the outcome of a game. The game that they won against Freeport, I have no reason why Freeport lost that game. I'm just going to be honest with you. They were the better team. They were the better team all season long, and Rockford East they beat them. And that happens.
Well, we kind of alluded to earlier. I mean, you look at Freeport's last 4 or 5 games, they just saw a decline in performance. I'm not saying that's the reason why they lost the game, but I would have to probably say that's probably accurate. But as it pertains to East, I just, kind of like Harold, I'm just gonna be honest, kind of like what we alluded to earlier about Auburn. You got to figure out a way to get more buy-in. You got to find out a way to really, bring your kids along. You have to. You can't think it's okay. And I know Coach Griff very well. I'm not saying that he's thinking this way, but you can't be okay as a head coach with going 1-8 one year, coming out going 2-7 the prior year, winning 3 games. I mean, you have to be able to compete. Okay, I alluded to that earlier. You got to be able to compete. You have to be tired of being the laughing stock, so to speak, in your conference. And I think what we're seeing over at East, at least what we've seen last year in 2024, yes, I agree with you. I really didn't see the talent that I'm accustomed to seeing over there at East. Okay. They had a decent run game with the young man, Quest. He was a running back. He's a junior, so he's back. They lose Laster. He's gone. He was a playmaker. And then you have Stone at the quarterback position, who's coming back, who started last year, but he's back for his senior season. So, and if you look at the system of East and look at what they run and and just the lack of balance that they have, I would a lot would probably agree with me. I think East has the least amount of balance of anybody in our conference. You know,
Other than Belvedere
you know,
North, I would say that's true.
they barely throw the ball. And like you said, Belvedere North, I agree. But you can't continue to be an unbalanced offense. Can't.
Well, so Tim, I would push back on that point. On this.
Go ahead.
You can if you're successful, because Belvedere North has proven that, and running teams that are successful can do that.
Okay.
But
okay. I'm gonna agree with you there. If you're successful, but we're talking about East.
Yeah.
What type of success have they had being unbalanced? Think about what East has had over the last 4 or 5, 6 years.
I would say 20 years. Go back at least 10.
Think about the playmakers that you could have put in space. Little perimeter out, little hitch, little out, and allow the athletes to do what they do best, and that's make people miss an open field.
Yeah.
You know, you take a Catlin for an example. You know, you barely saw him line up in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
And he could have been a threat in anybody else's offense in the slot.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, what I am saying does hold weight. You can't continue to do what you've always done when it's not as effective as it could be, and when you're not putting up the W's in the W column. That makes sense?
Correct. Yes, and I would say this too. You mentioned the junior running back quest they had. I didn't watch all 9 games, so with that preface, but I watched 5 of them because I was looking at other teams. Yeah. What I didn't see out of East was, okay, you had this threat as a running back. What were you going to do off of that to open up other players? You didn't do that either. And I've had the chance to watch Rockford East 3 times on the basketball court this year. They have athletes. There are athletes on the basketball team.
Harold,
why are they not playing
we're
football?
We're not. And some of those kids probably are football kids. We know East has damn good football athletes. We know that. The big problem that I have and what I've seen and witnessed, how are we bringing our kids along on an annual basis? How much better are they from their sophomore year, from their freshman year, their senior year, from their junior year?
Yep.
That's what it boils down to. You can't continue to put the same athlete on the field every year, particularly if they're lacking a lot of skill, athleticism, you know, those pillars that go in the game of football. If they're lacking these things, you got to, and you're bringing these kids back year in and year out, and you haven't really made the progress that you probably should have made or you could have made during the offseason. You gotta look at your head coach. You know what I'm saying? You have to look at your head coach, and the head coach has to be honest with himself. Head coach has to be honest with himself, look himself in the mirror and say, okay, you know, what's wrong here? How do I fix this thing?
Yeah.
How do I really fix it?
You need to do that. But Tim, we have to remember Coach Gary, he's the athletic director as well, right? I believe he's the athletic director. So he is in a very tough position. So let's lay that out there. You're the athletic director and you're the head football coach, which within most every school is the most prominent sport. That's kind of the world we live in, right? So how can he evaluate himself as the athletic director, as a coach? Like that's such a hard thing for me. And I think that's why a lot of colleges have gotten away from that. They went a little bit for a while to save money, I think, because they're cheap, but and a lot of schools used to do that, but they've gotten away from that because how do you evaluate yourself and say, hey, I'm the athletic director and I can see I'm not the best person for this job, or, hey, I need to change something within the football program, but I'm the athletic director. Can I do he is he's himself in a tough position.
Harold, and I get that. And I appreciate your candor. But I'm looking at the quarterback position. You had Stone line up at quarterback this year, 2024. I think he's played sparingly his sophomore year. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's another kid. Dad coached over at Boylan a few years back prior to his son, I believe, coming to high school. Okay, whatever reasons he did that, left Boylan, wanted to come over East, coach at East. That's fine and dandy. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I haven't seen the growth of that young man, Stone. I haven't seen the growth. Now, whose shoulders do you put that on? Before you answer me, think about it. Whose shoulders do you put that on? Okay, I'll give you an example. You look at Cole Warren, junior year, senior year. Did you or did you not see growth?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. I would say even not
in that growth, obviously, you know, the kid works on his own. You know, his dad is a quarterback guru. Jeremy's a quarterback guru. But you better damn well for sure, Coach Zim made sure this kid was going to be different from his junior year to his senior year.
Well, okay, so Tim, let's not even look at those two scenarios. Let's look at another Rockford school. Let's look at Guilford, Weber, from his sophomore year to his junior year. How much better did he get? Okay, that's a eggs to eggs comparison, or apples to apples, however you want to say it. Like the development needs to be there. You know, it has, and it needs to take place in the off season. Right now is when it needs to take place. Not look, when you kick it off on September 1st or around September 1st, the hay is in the barn. What you've done is what you've done. You're not going to get that much better during the regular season. You know, if you're going to make big strides, it's going to be during the offseason. It's going to be right now. Are you sitting down with that quarterback and going over every single play that you had during the regular season and talking to him about that? Are you talking to him about all of the other things that he needs to improve on? You know, are you doing that? I've not seen anything change at Rockford East to make me think that they're doing that. And I know that my opinion to them, it doesn't matter. But it sure does to those kids,
same here,
those parents.
But I'm just Harold. But what we're doing is, no matter who agrees with us or not, we're kind of speaking facts. You know, we're speaking facts. I haven't seen any progression from the young man. Yeah. I haven't seen some of the progression that I should see from some of those athletes. I haven't seen it. I'm sorry. You know, really, I'm not sorry. I don't apologize for what I'm saying, but I haven't seen it. You know, and that very well could be the main culprit over there from getting East, you know, to move the chain a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, we have to bring our kids along. Football is a game. We have to make sure our kids are developing the characteristics that are needed to succeed and progress in this game. If we're doing that, well, better yet, let me say this. The programs are doing that are having success. And you know, it's blatant. It's quite palpable. The programs that aren't. We don't have to say their names. Just look at them from year to year.
Yeah.
You know. So again, I hope to see a different East ERAP program in 2026 compared to the last couple seasons. I expect to see Stone do a 180 in 2026 compared to what he showed in 2025. That's what we should be seeing. That's what head coaches should want. That's what coaches should want. That's what O coordinators should want. Not a kid who takes 5 steps back, not a kid who comes back in 2026 and puts up the same performance he did in 2025 and 2024, particularly when they're mediocre performances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doesn't compute. You can't, that's not how you build a program. It's not how you bring kids along. My opinion.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. You know, it's got to be something where, again, I don't know any of the coaches on that staff, so, but it's got to be.
He's got to. Let me say this. Let me say this. You don't know any of those guys, but I know a lot of those guys. Great guys. Okay, He's got a damn good staff. Okay. Coach Griff he's football minded. Okay. Only thing we're saying, Harold, is we want to see you bring your players along. That's all we're saying.
Yep,
right?
That's it. We want to bring.
Are we saying? Are we speaking anything different?
No,
than what
we're absolutely speaking the exact same thing. We want to see success at whatever level it is, but bring the kids along, get them better,
bring along,
get Stone better,
bring along,
bring along. Get your team better.
Be okay with putting some different things in your offense that you haven't done in years, or you didn't do last year, the year before last. You know, be okay with being different. Be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, be okay with being vulnerable. Oh, we're a run dominant team, but you know, it probably won't hurt for us to be able to set a goal. We're going to pass 8 times a game, or we're going to pass 10 times a game. Set a goal is what I'm saying. Set a goal of what you want and what type of productivity you need to have and you want from your quarterback on an annual basis. You know what you want from your backs. You know what you want from your O-linemen, but what do you want from the main thread of your offense? What do you want from the main thread? Well, obviously we alluded to earlier. What do you want that quarterback to be able to do? Facilitate the offense.
Yep.
Okay. Execute. Okay. Get guys involved. Don't make mistakes. That's all you want the guy to do.
Yeah, hold everybody accountable.
Right. But as an offensive coordinator and as a head coach, you have to be a realist and say, okay, what does this guy, this kid, give me at the quarterback position? Does he not have the arm talent? Because that very well could be why he didn't put the ball in the air. Now, you know, the times that I did see Stone throw the ball, I had 1,000 question marks. Mm-hmm. I'm just being very honest. Yeah. I had 1,000 question marks. So that could be very well the reason why. But again, it all starts with what? Bringing your kids along.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, what I saw, the performance I saw in 2025, I damn well for sure better not see it in 2026.
Well, yeah.
Because I'm gonna sit here and say, okay, if I see the same mechanics, if I see the same velocity on the ball, if I see the same ill-advised passes that he made in 2020, in 2025, in 2026, I only can look at, I got to look at the old coordinator, whether it's Coach Griffin or whether it's another coach. I have to look at you. You're responsible for his progression.
Yep.
Whether you like it or not, you are responsible for his progression. Just like me. When I work with my athletes, I'm responsible for their success in their growth. I know that. As a head coach, basketball, football, baseball, you're responsible for your athlete's progression.
Yeah.
Whether you want to take full culpability for it or not, you're responsible.
Exactly. And when there's no responsibility there, it trickles down to everybody else in your program and into the culture of your football program. You know, and if, you know, I'm going to get back to, if Stone's not the right guy at quarterback, go find one of your other 30 kids that can throw. Go find a kid on your baseball team. Go find somebody in your school. You have bodies. It's your job to not only improve them, you need to be an advocate for your program.
Right.
Get those kids involved.
I agree.
I want to see East. I want to see East at 500 or above in the conference. I have not.
Harold, I totally agree with you.
I haven't seen that. That's what I want to see.
Harold, hands down, I totally agree with you. I'm not going to push back on anything you're saying. Only thing I'm saying is that you got to bring kids along, man. You can't let kids continue to be the same year in and year out.
Yes.
Find out what they lack. Start there. I mean, it's that simple. It really is. It's that simple. You know, but if you're okay with being mediocre, and this is applicable to any sport, any coach, if you're okay with being mediocre, then continue to do what you're doing. Because to me, it's absolute lunacy to not want to bring a kid along and see what that kid's best is. What's his best? Because if I'm a head football coach, I'm bringing kids in from the middle school level. Okay, I know a little bit about them. I got a little scouting report on them, but from their freshman year, freshman year, sophomore year, junior, senior year, oh, you better damn well for sure you're going to see a progression through those years, and it's going to be going to be drastic. It's going to be drastic. Yep. You have to think like that. Number one, not just think like that, but you have to actually look at putting together a strategy and ensuring that your kids are moving in that right direction, in the direction that you need them to actually move into, not the way they want to move into, because some of these kids today, they don't know what they lack. They don't know what they lack. Everybody wants to be a what? Everybody wants to be a quarterback. Everybody wants to be a running back. Everybody wants to be a skill guy. Well, it's like at the end of the day, right now, you don't possess those qualities to be that skill guy, that receiver. You're too slow. You don't have good hand and eye coordination. You don't have good foot speed. You don't have good quickness. You don't have the athleticism to play that position. So here's what I'm going to do. Yeah, I know you played, running back at the junior tackle level. You played defensive back at the junior tackle level. Okay, you can put kids anywhere at that level. But once you get to the high school level, you start talking about a totally different game, man. Mm-hmm. And that kid that I'm talking about, that kid may be having his hand down on the line. He may have his hand down. He may be on that defensive front because you got to find a position for him somewhere.
Yep.
But my point is, you don't have to do that if you bring your kids along.
Yeah. And I hope Coach Gary and those boys over there, they understand that and they can work on that.
I don't think it's a question if they understand it. I think they understand it. It's just now about, okay, how do we put together a strategy of implementing that? How do we implement it, and how are we going to quantify it? That's another thing. How are we going to quantify the success of our program? Think about it.
Well, he's been there long, but that staff's been there.
I'm not Harold. I'm not just talking about Coach Griffin. I'm talking about any coach in any.
No, sport. I'm talking about the entire staff. They've been there together long enough that they should have that in place. My opinion.
You hope. I don't know. I haven't been in a coaches meeting with these guys. Love to, but I haven't had that opportunity. Probably won't. That's fine. But because I'm not a football coach. But the point that I'm trying to make is that just to sum it up, every athlete has to be on an annual basis. Yep. You can't have this, and you can't have this.
Yeah, can't have plateaued.
Yep. Can't, man, can't. Harold, real quick before we go, man, there's a list. I know you're going to share with us. All conference, Nick 10 football, all conference. Can you illuminate the players that made the list? Real quick.
Absolutely. So on offense, the wide receivers were Demarius Taborn, Messiah Tilson, and Jackson Cook. The running back positions were Gavin Sanders, Chris Porter, and we've talked about him a ton, and then Ben Booker. Booker was also the MVP of the conference. On the line, you had Gabe Vernetti, the center from Boylan, who's going to play at North Dakota State. He's going to be the long snapper out there, so we'll see him. Ronan Bufus, he is the offensive lineman from Guilford. I believe he's going to play at a junior college in Iowa, I believe is what I saw, but don't quote me on that one. Tyson Hill from Harlem, he was an offensive lineman. Dylan Simp and Maximus Benson from Hononegah, they were on the offensive line. The MVP or the first team quarterback was Braxton Fawcett, and then at wide receiver also Michael Townsend from Jefferson. Grayson Weber was also on the first team as quarterback, so we had two first team all conference quarterbacks. And then Malachi Richardson, the Tennessee Tech recruit at offensive line, the 6'8", 380-pounder with a first teamer. And then Nathan Alexander at split end or wide receiver was also a first teamer. On defense, we had Keeson Taylor from Guilford. We had Noah Crandall from Harlem, and then John Sams from Boylan along the defensive lines. We had Keith Tellis, AJ Tauscher, and Nick Young on defense. Brennan Brixon from Harlem was a linebacker. We had Eric Roman at linebacker, and then we had LeBron McClellan, Brady Jarvis, Noah Rooney, Antonio Williams, Matt Lekowski, and Brayson White from Freeport. They were in the defensive backfield. And then we had David Wells, Dylan Crawford as a defensive lineman and linebacker. And then the defensive MVP was Eric Roman from Belvedere North. And then the coach of the year was Jeff Beck. And then the specialists were Mason Burns from Harlem. He was the punter. He had a great season. And then Leo Andretti was the kicker from Belvedere. And I believe he kicked a 44-yarder this year. I believe it was 44 or 45-yarder. So he had a big leg, big season for him. So, and then we had some honorable mentions as well, as that's what the Nick 10 does. They have honorable mention. Peter Esgula from Auburn, Nick Alvarez from Belvedere that we've mentioned earlier, Alex Hernandez from Boylan, Jared Quist from East, Demarius Douglas from Freeport, Halston Carter from Guilford, Reed Tickner from Guilford, Dwayne Broom from Harlem. He could easily have been a first-teamer for sure.
Easily.
Brian Craig from Harlem, Keegan Vansel from Hononegah. Yeah. Caleb Parker Loans from Hononegah, Jace Schnack from Jefferson, Jaden Williams, the quarterback from Jefferson. He got it as a secondary player, though, as a safety. Easily could have been a first-team safety. He had a fantastic season on defense. Seth Williamson from North and Andrew Bucci from North as well. They were honorable mentions. So a whole list of